Okay.
Apologies, Mayor.
That's
Sorry.
okay. So are we streaming? Sorry. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's council meeting. Nyama, Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Gulin, Gunganyinu Bik Wenua Darabandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yalingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people who are the traditional owners of the land on which Darebin Council stands. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda, noting that we have an approved Councillor Greco on approved leave of absence. Item 3, disclosures of conflict of interest. Councillors, are there any conflicts to declare tonight? Yes, Councillor Messina.
Madam, through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to declare that I have a conflict on item number 8.1, age-friendly Darebin review. Whilst I'm a professional in the aged care sector, I don't have a conflict with many of the items in the review, but I'm seriously disappointed that I have been advocating for many items in this particular piece of paper that I am not able to discuss further in the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Messina, and we'll get you to do that at the beginning of that item. I appreciate that. Confirmation of the minutes of the previous council meeting. That's moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Amir. All those in favour? That is carried. And that brings us to question and submission time. But before we begin, I would like to set out my expectations with regards to our behaviour and remind councillors of our obligations tonight under the Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council. In the interest of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It is important for both councillors and the community to remember that our council chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everybody, both emotionally as well as physically. I want to be clear that I will not tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another, any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections from the gallery. We do have a lot to get through tonight, and as always, I will expect people to direct their questions or comments through me as the chair, and I will try and make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak, but also that we stick to time. Moving to question time, I'll start with questions submitted online, but before they do that, I would like to remind people in the gallery that you are required to approach the lectern and clearly state your name. If you cannot approach the lectern, an officer will come to you, and I'll ask that you direct your questions to myself as the Mayor and limit your questions to 2, as this gives an opportunity for everyone to participate. Please make your questions brief and to the point. There's no need for lengthy introductory comments to preface your questions. So the first question that we've received is from Lainey Stockman, who isn't attending, so I'll read the question. The July the 22nd Council meeting coincides with the 6th year anniversary of the asylum seeker policy, whereby all asylum seekers arriving in Australian territory by boat are transferred to Manus Island or Nauru. As Darebin is a refugee welcome zone, and as per a similar motion by the City of Sydney on the 24th of June 2019, could the Mayor and councillors please write to the Prime Minister, the Honourable Scott Morrison MP, and the Minister for Home Affairs, the Honourable Peter Dutton MP, on behalf of Council. The purpose of this letter should be to express strong opposition to the policy of mandatory offshore detention of asylum seekers who have arrived by boat, and to request the urgent resettlement of refugees and asylum seekers on Manus Island and Nauru and onshore detention, and to request an inquiry into the death of a 23-year-old man at the nearby MITA facility on the 13th of July 2019. Thank you, Ms Stockman, for your question. As a refugee welcome zone and a Welcoming Cities member, Council continues to advocate for the rights of refugee and asylum seekers. Council remains deeply concerned about the well-being of asylum seekers in offshore detention. We have written many times to the federal government about the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. We most recently wrote to the Prime Minister about offshore detention last year. Thank you for your suggestions tonight, and I will send a further letter again asking the federal government to abandon their inhumane and cruel approach to the treatment of asylum seekers and to cease offshore detention. The next question is from Mr. David Toscano. Is David here? Yeah, David, please come up.
Sure. David Toscano, postcode for the organisation that I represent is 3072, which is Northern Community Care Works. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to pose this question to you. Northern Care Works currently provides approximately 65 lunches each day, 4 times a week, to between 80 to 100 vulnerable community members. Some come daily, while others visit weekly or monthly. We also have 19 community members who volunteer their time and a further 80 long-term unemployed, gaining valuable work experience, assisting them into employment. Through this program, we have created a supportive community of people who have few social networks and struggle to afford healthy food. For many participants, the CareWorks lunch is their only social connection for the week, and many friendships have formed. We have been providing this service to Darebin residents for 15 years, but changes to federal government funding means that unless we urgently secure new funding, this program will conclude in the coming months, leading to greater isolation for many of Darebin's most vulnerable residents. Would Darebin Council consider providing short-term funding to continue the lunches program while alternative funding options are explored? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, David. With the community lunches and other programs you provide, Northern Care Works certainly works hard to help the community in Darebin, and I want to express our thanks for the work that you do. I'm aware that Northern Care Works services have been going through a significant transition in recent years. I'm advised that the 2016 changes to the federal government funding for Work for the Dole and associated services for the unemployed resulted in a significant reduction in funding to Northern Care Works. This has put much pressure on Northern Care Works, and you've had to reduce services while looking to raise more funds. So I'm sure it was difficult news last week that Northern Care Works had missed out on a 3-year grant from Council through the new 3-year partnership grant program. As it turned out, this program was highly competitive, with 30 applications in the equity and wellbeing category requesting over $1.3 million per year. The budget was less than a fifth of that. The standard of application was high, and an independent panel assessed and prioritised the applications. I'm aware that senior staff have met with you today to explore ways that Council may be able to help outside of Council's 3-year grant program. Council would be keen to work together with you to secure funding from the state government, federal government and other sources. Thank you again for the work that you do and for coming tonight to pose your question. I have 2 questions that have been received from Mr. Brian Sanigan. These questions will not be responded to nor read out, as they contain language that is objectionable and language that aims to embarrass council officers and councillors. The next question is from Mr. Jeffrey Richards. Would you like to come up to read your question?
Mayor Rennie and councillors, Jeff Richards from 47 Story Road in Reservoir, and I'm here as the chair of the body corporate for those 7 units. Unfortunately, I'd raised a couple of years ago repairs to fencing. This property is adjacent to the Story Reserve. The manager advised me only the other day that they'd been in correspondence since last year, 18th of August, when I first commenced looking at this, and it's fencing that needs needed then painting, repairs, some improvement, and you might have got 4 or 5 more years out of it then. The thing's protracted on, and we get nowhere. I look at the correspondence. I've been away, I just came back, and I look at the correspondence and you get one-line sentences that, for goodness sake, a site meeting could have resolved. With it dragging on, it's now at the point where you may now need to do a full fence, and it'd be debatable which you would spend the money on. So can I have some advice that something will be progressed? Of course, you may be saying it's not our responsibility at all. I understand that it's a shared responsibility, but we need to clarify that as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Richards. Thank you for your question in relation to shared fencing costs. On occasion, council will share the cost of fencing where private properties abut council property. Council's manager of assets and capital delivery will make contact with you on Tuesday the 23rd of July 2019 to arrange a suitable time to inspect the property and the fence with a view to making a determination on shared fencing costs.
Thank you very much. I go overseas on the 25th for 2 months.
Well, it's a good thing we've committed to get in there quickly.
So you've only got me for a short time, but thank you.
Good to know. Thank you. The next question is from Ms Serena O'Malley. Serena, would you like to come and ask your question?
Serena O'Mealy, 3073. The first question is, it appears that no responsible body or consultative committee in Darebin, other than the level crossing removal project itself, has seen the design of the new Reservoir Railway Station. Will Council arrange for a briefing on the station design and services?
I'll get you to continue on because this is one question, then I'll answer them together.
Sure. I've been told that Darebin Council officers believe that the station requires 120 bicycle spaces. However, the LXRP is reliant upon the installation of a parketeer cage with just 26 spaces and a further 15 metal hoops. What lobbying has Darebin Council already undertaken and will continue to undertake to ensure that the bicycle parking fits with the aesthetic of the new station and is sufficient, accessible, sheltered and secure, including for electric and alternative bikes?
Thank you for that question relating to the level crossing removal program. The level crossing removal program has published high-level design information which are on the LXRP's website. These show at a high level what the plans are, but they haven't completed all the detailed design yet. I do understand you wanting more detail, and we would like more detail on the same things too. But what this also means is that it's a good time to ask for things that you think are important, as not all the design decisions have yet been made. In regard to getting information on the design, I suggest attending the LXRP's weekly drop-in sessions at the Reservoir Library or calling them. If you're having trouble getting a timely response to questions, our team can help you by following up with them. We've also been asking them to improve the designs, including widening the pedestrian plaza, incorporating kiosks, planting more trees and increased bike parking. And yes, we have been asking for 120 bike spaces. We've been asking for the parketeer cage to be upgraded and enlarged for good signage and for bike parking close to the station entrance without getting in the way of pedestrians. The LXRP haven't confirmed if they will increase bike parking, but they have said they will talk to Transport for Victoria about this. I would encourage you and other community members to keep letting the LXRP know that bike parking is important. Council has set up a dedicated staff team to advocate for better designs and to help community through the disruption. I've met with the Minister for Transport Infrastructure and can confirm that I will write to her again on behalf of Council about the improvements we're seeking at Reservoir Station. We'll keep working hard at advocating for good design at all levels of the administration as well as at council level.
Sorry, as a follow-up, can I just ask that you lobby for the bike parking to be incorporated into the station design instead of the quite ugly and hard to access parketeer case?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And you have another question?
Yes. During the Darebin Council meeting on the 24th of June 2019, Councillor Tim Lawrence refused to sit down in response to a ruling of the Mayor, accused her of political bias, misandry, and words to the effect that he doesn't need to talk to people in Darebin about gendered invisibility. His behaviour and statements are an attack on the office of the Mayor and the women who make up the majority of the current council. Personally, I was deeply offended and left the meeting in disgust. What steps are open to Darebin Council to ensure that Councillor Lawrence complies with the Councillor Code of Conduct, to which he is a signatory in the future?
Thank you for that question, Serena. I'm committed to ensuring that our meetings are conducted in a respectful manner and in a way that promotes fair and robust debate while allowing for differences of opinion. You will have noticed that at the commencement of each meeting, I outline my expectations of the appropriate behaviours that will allow us to achieve this. I, as Mayor, have a responsibility under the Local Government Act 1989 to provide guidance to councillors about the application of the Councillor Code of Conduct. Where I consider that councillors are not acting in accordance with the principles of this code, I will address that with them directly in the chamber and also privately as required. Your question does serve as a timely reminder to all councillors that community members also have expectations of appropriate behaviour, and I hear clearly that on this occasion your expectations, which I expect are similar to the expectations of many people here, were not met.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of questions on notice, so I'll invite questions from members of the gallery. Please raise your hand or otherwise indicate if you have a question and we'll get the microphone to you. Anne, please come up to the lectern.
Hi, please state your name and postcode.
Hi, and Margaret Ann Learmont, 3070. My questions are both in relation to the age-friendly review final report that's going to be discussed, and I'm concentrating on the ones at the end. Number 96 says they will establish, or there has been established, it's not clear to me, a cross-organisation project control group, which sounds wonderful. And the clause mentions consultation with the Active and Healthy Ageing Advisory Board, which I'm a member of, and 4 other organisations that I've never heard of before. How is the membership of these organisations arranged, and does it include an opportunity for local residents, especially those with specific knowledge that would be useful to council, to be included? That's question 1. Question 2, with 98 recommendations, how will priorities be determined? Who decides this? And when will residents be informed about timelines and priorities?
Thank you for those questions, Ms Learmont. With this matter on the agenda tonight, any answer would be preemptive in relation to a decision that council may make further down the agenda. So with that in mind, I will ask Ms Henderson if you can briefly give an outline of what the steps might be should council indeed pass the motion as recommended.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, if council passes a resolution tonight as recommended in the paper, then there are some priorities embedded in that paper. So, for instance, it sets out that certain trials would happen in financial year 2019-20. There's other things which require further investigation before they'd be worked through, but I think the intention of the report is that there'd be consultation with the Active and Healthy Ageing Advisory Board. And just to clarify that the groups that you hadn't heard of in recommendation 96, that's because they're proposed new groups, and the format of how they'd be created is still yet to be determined, but that's why you haven't heard of them before.
Thank you for that question, and thank you to Ms Henderson for the response. Are there further questions from the gallery? Yes, there's a gentleman in the back row.
Hi Chair, my name's Paul Hodson. I'm from postcode 3071. Excuse me for a second. My question is in relation to motion 10.1 in front of you tonight. I represent a petition to save 33 Combs Grove, Thornbury from demolition. Will you be able to add the petition and its 655 signatures alongside the motion to the, if it passes, to the submission to the Planning Minister? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Paul. Yes, I believe that is fine, so that's something we could do, if that is subject to council support for the motion later in the agenda. Thank you. Are there further questions from the gallery? Yes, Mr Nugent.
John Nugent, Epping 3076. Mayor Rennie, last year I asked a question about 10 months ago about reparking at the Preston Market. I took Councillor Messina around the market and introduced her to the shopkeepers affected by non-customer parking at Preston Market during September. Councillor Messina has informed me there is a report on this matter. Mayor Rennie, when will this council report will be released so we can help the shopkeepers?
Thank you for that question, Mr Nugent. I don't have an answer offhand. I will need to take that on notice.
Not a problem. Mayor Rennie, my second question is, could you please advise, out of the 1920 budget, what was paid to consultants?
Thank you for that question, Mr Nugent. I don't have the budget figures in front of me, so I'll take that also on notice.
Just another...
And noting that 1920 hasn't yet been paid, so you're talking about what has been budgeted for, presumably.
Yeah, what's been paid out to the consultants for the current budget, you know?
In the current year?
Yes, this
Okay,
current year.
Okay.
Are we behind in our mail sending out council questions, Mayor Rennie?
Pardon me?
I haven't received a couple of answers to my questions I asked for the last couple of meetings, one about smoking around council buildings. There's a few others. I noticed one about Pender Park. Still haven't received an answer to. Can you please follow up on them?
I can follow up. Thank you, and I
Mayor
apologise.
Rennie.
Okay. Are there further questions from the gallery? Are there submissions from members of the gallery? And if you have a submission, you may make that before any item in question. So I'll just check. Mr Richards, did you... Before the item in question. Okay, and that would be item 8.1? Okay, thank you. So I'll pause for submissions at that point. So on that note, we will continue with the agenda. The next item is petitions. Are there any petitions? No, there being no petitions, we'll move on. Number 7, urgent business. There's no urgent business that was accepted, but Councillor Lawrence, you had...
I'd just noted that I had urgent business about safety of women in Edward Street Reservoir and an asbestos matter that hasn't been followed up.
Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, can I get you to say that again with your microphone to make sure that everyone can hear?
I had an urgent business item regarding social safety at Edward Street and conflicts between intoxicated people in an alcohol ban-free zone. I had a urgent notice of motion about asbestos risk with a derelict building that's not sealed, that's had 8 months of complaints on it in High Street Reservoir.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We'd need to look at the motion in question so that councillors could make an assessment. We'd need to... Okay. Can I just confirm that this is the motion that was the urgent business item that you submitted before? You've mentioned 2 there and I thought there were 3. So we might need to go by them one at a time.
There was 3, yeah. But those were the 2 I was highlighting.
Okay, so... So, Councillor Lawrence, if I confirm you're seeking to move those as urgent business rather than highlight them as urgent issues?
Mayor Rennie, I'd have to have clarification about what that is. I'm more accustomed to best putting those items at general business at the end, but we don't have general business anymore.
No, that's correct. So, Councillor Lawrence, you've raised those matters as urgent. I could take at face value that they've been raised as urgent and we could proceed with the agenda, but I understand that you want to debate them or move a motion on those topics. Can I clarify that?
Mary, no, I'm quite happy for them to be dealt with according to the local law. Your advice is that they don't fit in an urgency motion. My main issue is that they're noted because their building is still open and getting accessed, especially the asbestos issue. So if they're noted, that's fine.
I will ask for some advice from the CEO as to whether we can just note them and move on, because otherwise we would have to have a vote, or to see if they're accepted.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So the three matters that you raised in an email late, so I received about 5:45 tonight, they don't comply with the provisions of the local law in terms of admitting urgent business, just the technical aspects of the local law. However, I've now got those emails, so I'll make sure that they're actioned tomorrow.
Thank you, Mayor Wren. I'm very happy with that because they're simply asking for council investigation.
Thank you. So we'll move on then to item 8, which is consideration of reports. And the first item is 8.1, Age-Friendly Darebin Review. No, sorry, we have some community members who would like to make a submission.
I have a conflict. Although I have had the pleasure of sitting in some of the briefings on some of the topics I'm able to discuss, and I've been advocating for the past 4 years on gardening and volunteering, I'm disappointed, extremely disappointed that I'm not in a position to voice my...
Messina, I hear your disappointment. Thank you. So noted your disappointment, and thank you for declaring that conflict. So I would now like to invite any community member who would like to make a submission to come up to the lectern and make a submission in relation to 8.1 on the agenda. If you just put your hand up so I know how many people. Yes, please come on. Okay, 1, 2, 3. That's fantastic. First one, yep, take you.
Sarah Russell, 3070. When I was last here, I was critical of the expense of an independent expert panel. So it may be a surprise to hear me say on this occasion that I'm extremely pleased with the outcome. At the same time that Rhonda Galbally and Peter Allen were undertaking their work on an aged care friendly Darebin, I was researching home care packages and Commonwealth Home Support Program. And I'm going to give my report in a minute to you guys. I think Kathy's read it. But so one of my findings, there are a lot of findings for anyone who'd like to have a copy. It's online. One of my findings is the aged care space desperately needs leadership. And this leadership involves listening to all key stakeholders, including older people and staff. And I would like to now turn around and commend the Darebin councillors, the council officers. I'm not sure who I'm actually commending, but I want to particularly commend Kathy Henderson for showing leadership. I'd also like to turn around and thank Robin Vogt for her leadership. I don't know if you know Robin, but she's sitting there. Robin worked tirelessly to mobilise the community and bring the different stakeholders to the negotiating table. Now, my study showed older people who transitioned from CHSP to home care packages regretted, and sometimes deeply regretted, not being able to continue to use council services. They found the council services and support workers a much, much higher standard than their private provider.
10 seconds.
10 seconds to say I was thrilled, therefore, to read the staff are currently exploring a trial of council providing services to clients in Darebin who have home care packages in partnership with a not-for-profit home care package. And this, I think it's important, I know over time, but this would indeed confirm the Darebin Council's reputation as a trailblazer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that submission, Ms Russell. I now invite Ms Vogt to come down and make a submission.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I've got a bit of a husky voice, so if I clear it, sorry. I'm Robin Vogt, the convener of Does Council Care, which has been campaigning and encouraging council to remain as a provider of aged care. Does Council Care is an unaligned and very small community group, and all the members have been incredibly energetic. We're very pleased with the outcome of the age-friendly Darebin report, particularly the final recommendations. We believe that the council staff are presenting you tonight an absolutely broad and in-depth advice and also guidance for you to implement the whole report and its recommendations. We're particularly interested in the pilot project, which is going to explore the feasibility of council presenting the community with the option of having council provide home care packages. Does Council Care will be totally supportive and wherever we can be helpful in implementing that pilot project. And again, congratulations to the staff. They've given you an implementation plan, minus a couple of columns, and we're happy, really, with the result. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Vogt, for that submission. I'd now invite Mr Richards to come down and make a submission.
I'm Jeff Richards from Story Road in Reservoir and a member of the AHAB board. I want to endorse the comments of the two previous speakers, and we've worked together on it and it's been amazing. The work with Kathy too. To get a report of this depth was incredible to start with. Originally, I, like Sarah, thought the Aged Care Board could do it. But this is far more valuable, far more in depth and far wider for it. If you look at me alone taking a different picture, I'm 82, vaguely fit, I think, self-funded retiree, and I want to stay where I am and use that package. And I don't want a different carer coming to me each week. I don't want to have to retell my story to the other ones. I've had experience as chair in the retirement village of a number of different providers. The happy Vegemites were the ones using the council provided services for it. So that's what I would look forward to as well. The review's very positive in most of the recommendations. To me, it would be unwise, being an accountant, I'd say we've only half spent our money here, we've got to get a return now, let's do the next step to it. So we've had a picture of where we are now. And this report here and the recommendations, and I have read it there for it, is great. And it goes through those 98 points for it. We should accept them. I support the accepting of it, but we're only part way there. But keep going with this process, I urge you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie.
Thank you very much, Mr Richards. Councillors, if I have a motion, yes, Councillor Newton.
Thank you. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Okay, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence?
I'd just like to foreshadow amended motion, alternate motion.
Okay, thank you.
Deferral motion.
In the event that this is unsuccessful, I'll note that that has been foreshadowed. Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is a really important night for us, and firstly I commend Rhonda Garbally and Peter Allen for putting together this amazing piece of work, as well as all the residents who took time to tell us what they want and need in an age-friendly Darebin, as well as Kathy, Shardy and the team here at Darebin. And lastly, our Healthy and Active Ageing Advisory Committee, some of who are here tonight, who made sure that we headed in the right direction with this report. This outstanding report is the result of speaking to over 1,000 residents about their needs now and into the future. And what I find incredible about this is that this is something that came out of something that was seen as largely negative. The proposed changes coming from the federal government that could see the way we provide aged care services change dramatically. I commend our officers for turning this into an opportunity to find out what our current and future senior residents want and need to make our city truly aged friendly. I love the ideas about older people helping other older people where they can, for instance. We here have 98 recommendations that we can implement that will transform Darebin into a truly age-friendly city. Tonight, we're allocating $500,000 to begin this crucial work, with $200,000 for social inclusion, volunteering and aged care navigation support services. We heard that loneliness and isolation is a growing problem for our older residents. This money will go towards trialling a new volunteer program to address social isolation and a new service with expert staff to help people navigate the My Aged Care system, which they often find difficult. $120,000 for a lawn mowing gardening service or volunteer program, which we will be hearing more about at a future council meeting. $50,000 towards service improvements to address improvements of our existing services, and $60,000 to implement the Senior Citizens Action Plan. This will include building the capacity of culturally and linguistically diverse community groups, and it's going to bring the groups together with developing and facilitating an older persons community group network connecting the presidents of the older people's community groups. We have $15,000 for new grants for community groups, $32,000 for a men's shed and $23,000 for other programs, information and workshops. Also, significantly, as our presenters have mentioned, while we do not currently usually provide services to people with home care packages, we're going to be exploring a trial of council providing services to clients in Darebin who have home care packages in partnership with a non-for-profit home care package provider that could commence this financial year and inform the proposed navigation support and social inclusion service. I'm really proud of this report and I'm proud of the work that's gone into it. One quote that I think was really incredible was that this means Darebin's older people will be more visible and visibly included, experience improved quality of life, and that this in turn will make Darebin a better place for everyone. I commend this report to you.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Newton has covered it superbly well, and I don't want to take away from anything she said. I do want to echo her sentiments and her thanks to the three submitters this evening. Thank you so much for those incredibly kind words and also for each of your enduring participation in the process, and also to the over 1,000 residents who have been involved in the consultative process. And holding this document and the depth of ideas, thinking and rigour in terms of a way forward. It's actually quite heartening to think if we could do this with every major policy challenge, how great it would be. That isn't always necessarily the case. It is a resource-intensive piece of work, but it is worth every cent. Because, as you can see, the $500,000 of investment proposed tonight, the millions of dollars of investment that is effectively locked in to support older people in our community. And many of us who intend to age here in Darebin, this is the security of the future living here in this place. I also want to thank both Rhonda and Peter for their enormous work, their dedication and the care that they have taken in every stage of this process. It is not easy to look at a challenging area that is facing all sorts of pressures at both the local, national and international level from both public and private sector forces. But to sort of guide us and also to guide the community through a process and to get to the stage where we have a report with such rich recommendations, we need to express our sincere thanks for their leadership in that space. I also want to finally say a big thank you and echo Councillor Newton's thanks to our officers, many of whom are here tonight with us in the gallery, who have worked extensive hours to make this happen and have brought the level of professionalism that I think our community expects and deserves in terms of getting to the best possible way forward, which I think is what
10
we have here
seconds.
tonight. So thank you to everyone, and I think this is a great example that we should be sharing with other councils around the country as well as a way to look at this issue in more rigour.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. I just note with this report, I have some amendments or feedback on this report that go to regards to both the resources that are put in the front of this recommendation, but also go to the detail about the development of home packages, which at this point I'm not putting...
So Councillor Lawrence, can I just check, if you have amendments, we'll deal with them one by one.
Yes.
I'll just note the clock's ticking down as though you're speaking to the item, and I wasn't sure whether you're now speaking to the item or whether you're, this is a preamble to amendments.
I'm speaking to the item because I'm not going to forward those amendments which improve both the resources for these services. In particular, we've been advised that the gardening services here allocation will be inadequate to really make any impact in the community. And more importantly, there is some strengthening we need to do around the actual home packages, because we're kind of flagging a hope in the community and building a hope that council will remain in this space no matter what happens. Now, part of that actually requires detailed work that isn't marked in these recommendations in terms of detailed work to the level of care of packages that we're going to actually design. And that, I feel, should be in it. But I'm in a difficult situation because we have other councillors have requested this item be heard next in 3 weeks' time, so that the oldest member of this council can actually participate in this motion. So at the moment, I'm not going to vote against the motion. I've flagged that we should have a deferral and let the oldest member on this council be involved in this process. And obviously, there'll be other motions, a notice of motion I'll put forward
10
next
seconds.
week to actually deal with the deficiencies that I've just outlined.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
It's really exciting to be tabling this report this evening after it's been, I'd say, at least 2 years of work in the lead up for, especially I think for us who were new to council in 2016, it's been a steep learning curve to understand around service delivery and aged care services and the really broad needs of older people in Darebin. So it's exciting to be here tabling the report from two experts, Rhonda Galbally and Peter Allen, who have done wonderful work, and it's really wonderful to hear from the community that that has been supported, and I feel like hopefully we've nailed it, if we can say, acknowledging that this is just the beginning and there's a lot of work to be done around the implementation of the recommendations and I guess responding to quite a changing and evolving environment. The thing that I like most about the report and the recommendations are the breadth of both, so covering areas around aged care support services, physical accessibility, safety, transport, parks and gardens, access to information, social participation, connection and support. So it's really not just about people having their basic needs met, it is that, but also being able to live really good lives with social connection, with ongoing learning every day, and with access to art, access to nature, access to things that make life fun and good and make people happy. And so what that will mean in practice is embedding this age-friendly approach all the way across council and every area of service provision that we do, from the way that gardens are created to our leisure services and arts programming as well. So thank you so much to Rhonda and Peter for your amazing work. Thank you so much to the staff who have worked tirelessly for a long time, and to the over 1,000 people, especially those who have particularly worked hard in the audience tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Williams had indicated a desire to speak next. Was
for
Okay.
the movers to consider.
Certainly, I'll take that amendment now and we'll come back to Councillor Williams.
Mayor Rennie, I'd like to move an amendment to address the issues I raised earlier, and the amendment would be that the movers and seconders consider moving this motion with the exception of item 3, and that we defer item 3 to 3 weeks' time, so that we could take in Councillor Greco's suggestions on that package.
So the amendment is to delete item 3.
To defer item 3 so it...
It would be
to
effectively...
defer item 3 so it comes back as a separate item so that we can go through those individual actions.
Okay, so in terms of the motion ahead of us, that would be a motion to delete 3 on the understanding that it would come to a further meeting. Yeah, I'll check if that's acceptable to the mover.
No, I don't accept.
So, Councillor Lawrence, that hasn't been accepted. You'd need to find a seconder. Is there a seconder for that?
Happy to second it to hear the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. So, Councillor Lawrence, over to you to speak to that amendment.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. This amendment I'm moving is in fact doesn't slow down the substantive motion actions in this motion, which are 1 to 2 through from 4 to 7, which notes the reports, thanks the participants, and in fact, accepts the report in this chamber. But by deferring the actual details of this immediate budget action, I think it would be good if we were able to defer that and have that as a separate motion, because it is an important issue for our community, and then have the more detailed debate about some of whether we can actually improve the funding in some of these models to make those services effective. And again, it would be a pity if the age-friendly report is brought forward at this meeting and we actually exclude the oldest member in the council from the adoption of the report. It sort of begins with a process that's not inclusive. But by splitting this motion, we can actually strengthen the actions next time, if that is the will of the council, and still process and adopt this report tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams?
In reference to the...
You're speaking to the amendment.
No,
if
I've
you
got
wish.
nothing further to say.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So while I do acknowledge that Councillor Greco is on an approved leave of absence, I think that this is the result of, as Councillor Mir was saying, about 2 years of work. And we did sign off the budget a few weeks ago, so I think it's actually really important to allocate the $500,000 tonight so that we can get started. And I'm sure that when Councillor Greco returns from his leave of absence, he'll be included in any further discussions, such as I know that we're having further discussion about the gardening and lawn mowing service, which I assume will happen when he returns from leave.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers to the amendment? There being none, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost, so the motion stands as per the screen. Councillor Williams, you'd indicated that you wish to speak to...
Yes, I'd like to speak in reference to the age-friendly Darebin review. I'd like to say a big thank you to the independent panel and for all their work, for the staff and the residents that have been involved in this huge report that's taken many years of involvement. But the report seems to lack the actions that this council is doing and where we're going to be in getting ready for those who are over 65. I'd like to have seen more in reference to action for our 200 plus staff and where they're going to sit in all this. I would have liked to have seen a bit more commitment from council and seen more actions rather than just recommendations. in seeing where we are going to, as a council, what sort of supply are we going to be as a council, and how are we going to be that service for those who are over 65, especially for those for the Cole community, and how are we going to ensure that nobody's actually left behind. I find the report lacks that. Although I find that we have some fantastic recommendations here, and the pilot project is definitely a wonderful implementation plan going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? There being none, Councillor Newton, would you like to exercise your right of reply?
No, thank you.
So we'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. I'll ask that the officers note that that was a unanimous decision. Before we move on, I would like particularly to thank all of the staff from our aged care team, Mr. Shadi Hannon, Ms. Kathy Henderson, and all of the hundreds of staff in that team who have done such an outstanding job being ambassadors for council and the work that they do. And I'll ask Mr. Hannon if you could please convey our most sincere thanks to the staff within your team. And also note and thank the work of Mr. Peter Allen, Ms. Rhonda Galbally in preparing the report. And thank you to community members who have supported the work in many ways over the last couple of years and who have come along to speak to it tonight. Thank you. Councillors, that brings us to item 8.2 on the agenda. Is that moved by Councillor McCarthy? And just for the sake of the record, are you moving
The substantive motion.
the substantive motion? Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Amir. Yes, Councillor Lawrence?
I have an amendment for that motion.
Okay, thank you. What I propose to do is hear from the mover and the seconder, and then we'll come straight to you to hear about your amendment. So we'll get there. So, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. So the document you have before yourselves tonight, councillors, means a great deal to myself, a great deal I know to you, and an enormous amount to our community, who have indicated consistently over many years that they deeply value open space. They deeply value particularly the green spaces, the bushlands, the parks, the creeks, the ovals, the play spaces, all those things that come under this particular definition. And what they have also told us over many years is that they want a vision that is bold, a vision that demonstrates a commitment to expanding and increasing both the amount and the quality of open space in our community. The document we have before us tonight does just that at the strategic level and points the way in terms of how we'll do that at the practical level. And the document itself, which is known as Breathing Space, if it's adopted this evening, will go out for a final stage of consultation. It is worth noting that this document, this strategy, has gone through an extensive amount of work up until now. This has not just arrived overnight. This has been through a rigorous process, particularly with input, obviously from a broader community and also with specific specialist input from the Darebin Nature Trust, which was established in the start of this council term. I want to just highlight a few of the key policy changes that sit within Breathing Space, which are a variation from the previous open space strategy that we had in place, which I was submitted to before I became a councillor in 2008. The first thing, and this is absolutely crucial, is that this consolidates the position of us having a net increase in open space within the city of Darebin. And to do that, obviously, to propose an increase in the open space contributions rate, which is essential to funding an increase in the open space amount that we have in Darebin. This also commits us to not only a net gain in open space, but also looks at opportunities for habitat linkages through streetscapes to green the city and, of course, to reduce the heat island effect. this document brings in a layer and a level of understanding of biodiversity that did not exist in our previous open space strategy, and that is the notion of rewilding. And this is absolutely essential to both the intent of the policy but also what our community has said, which is we should have no loss of local Indigenous and native animals, no local extinctions effectively as the policy position, which we did adopt previously in this chamber as a key direction. And of course, there are a range of other factors that are in play in this policy. This is, from my understanding, one of the most innovative, forward-thinking and long-term commitments to open space of any city in the country, and we should be enormously proud of the work that our officers and our community, and particularly the members of the Darebin Nature Trust in providing particular insight, have done to get us to this stage.
10
I'm
seconds.
really keen to hear what the community has to say about this, and I'm even looking forward even further to putting it into action. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
So as mentioned by Councillor McCarthy, the recommendation we have here is to release breathing space out for a final round of consultation. There has been extensive consultation on this document, and it's one that I guess it's very interesting and having some challenges I'll talk about briefly. There is a lot in there. It's about how we use open space, biodiversity protection, respecting the land that existed before European invasion. It's also about creating community meeting spaces and access to nature, places to run and to play and to meet. And we chose the name Breathing Space because of the broad meaning that we literally need trees to breathe, but also the importance of having that space to unwind and the value of nature for mental health as well. The fact is that Darebin does not have enough open space, and that's a key challenge that I hear from a lot from residents, especially around the Preston Reservoir area. We need a lot more, and we're going to only need more and more as density increases and our population grows. So the most important thing for me in this is the commitment to increasing open space in Darebin, and I think that will be absolutely invaluable. I'm also really proud of the changes mentioned by Councillor McCarthy around making native bushland the default choice and recognising all forms of green space. The challenge will be around balancing different needs, and the obvious one is around the need for conservation, people's demand for play spaces, passive recreation, formal sporting activities. Also, it's been interesting having really in-depth discussions around where climate action and biodiversity protection might come into tension as well. So I've really valued the rigour that's gone into this. Thanks so much to the staff, Darebin Nature Trust, and everyone else who's contributed to this excellent document that I hope you'll enjoy reading.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Lawrence, you flagged an amendment?
Yes, I've sent for it's quite technical, so I would need it on the...
We might look to get that amendment up on the screen. Thank you. So I'll ask whether that... So, Councillor Lawrence, can I check that you'd wanted 1 and 2 as per the recommendation in addition to this? So, thanks community members and stakeholders for their feedback.
Yes.
And then releases the strategy.
Sorry for the technical drafting. Yes, these are the additional
to what's
points.
in there. So these would actually be points 3, 4 and 5.
Yeah, so they extend on it in that...
Onto the 1 and 2.
Except,
so
of course,
that's
the 25% target obviously goes up.
Thank you. So I'll ask whether that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
Can we ask, yeah, sorry, I've got a question. This is the first time I've seen this, Mayor, so can I ask a question before I give an answer?
Yes, you may ask a question.
Just in relation to proposed point 4, if we can just get an indication as to how many languages, community languages, it would be currently proposed to be provided in at the moment.
Thank you. So we'll take that as a first question, and I'll refer that question to Ms. Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. At the moment, in the light touch consultation phase, what we're proposing is social media, and a lot of the social media platforms these days automatically translate for other languages, so we'd actually expect to reach people in their preferred language, generally.
Thank you. I'll just note that in the report it talks about the consultation flyer being in the top 5 languages, plus English. So, Councillor Amir, there's further questions, so we'll just keep working through the questions.
Just a supplementary, just to understand the implications of point 4. If council were to consider that this evening as part of the motion, what implications that would have in terms of being able to deliver that?
Thank you, Ms. Livio.
As I think about that, so if the intention is that that information is during the consultation phase, I think we would need to extend the consultation phase. If the intention is that that is when a final strategy is considered and then adopted, then that wouldn't present any issues from my perspective. I think there'd be a small cost, but it could be accommodated.
Thank you. Councillor Amir, did you have a question?
Yes, I have 2 questions. One is whether the 20% tree coverage is for council-owned land or the entire municipality. And my second question is whether, to officers, or through you, Chair, whether the areas of Kingsbury Reservoir South and Preston West are identified as having the greatest shortfall, if that's consistent with that statement.
Ms. Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. First question first. In regards to the 25% tree coverage reference from the urban forest strategy, I believe that relates to public land. And then the second question about those access areas, I believe if you look at accessibility from the perspective of how many people are within 500 metres of an open space, that's correct. But if you look at accessibility from the perspective of where the most of our open space is, it's not. So I think it's a different 4 that would flag if you took that other lens. And generally my advice would be you actually want to consider both things in future acquisition decisions.
Thank you. So I've allowed those questions in order that the mover and seconder can consider whether they accept that amendment.
No.
No. So that's not accepted. Councillor Messina, I'd like to deal with this amendment first, which hasn't been accepted, so it would require a seconder. Is there a seconder? Thank you. That's been seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence, you may speak to the amendment.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, thank you for that. Look, I was a very enthusiastic supporter of the establishment of the Social Housing Trust back in 2016 and the Nature Trust as well, and I welcome this report. However, part of this report compares the open space strategy previously to the current one, but there was another policy, which was the urban forest strategy, which actually had to look at as an interplay over the top of it. So some of the report actually has false statements about council's position. We also had a false statement in this chamber about this being the most progressive policy as drafted in Australia. What I've actually done is simply look at some Liberal councils, some country councils, and obviously the Melbourne City Council, which our original urban forest strategy looked at the kind of tree coverage pace to match those strategies. Of course, in a bigger and longer picture, and that which only took us to 2028. So projecting that, I've just sort of suggested, as someone involved in environment for all my life, but a long time, I suppose, knocking on doors for 40 years of ministers on this, with placards, that we actually, because we're going from at least 25% within a 15-year period to just a 25% target, we've actually watered down. So that my concern is that this is actually a conservative and policy that actually doesn't meet even Liberal council targets, Liberal-dominated councils in Victoria. Now, I'm asking people to stretch a bit more on that and paint the vision further, because even our street tree strategy is a little bit sparse for what community wants. So there's a lot of realm of land. Now, obviously, there's a lot of land in Reservoir to actually increase many of these coverages. In relation to the languages, I'm sure that could be done before the final draft, but it is important that we reflect the full community and get into the full impact of those other communities about this policy. Now, in terms of precincts, one of the hidden traps in this report is the biodiversity clause that all acquisitions will actually increase biodiversity. And that, I'm afraid, will actually prevent the purchase of land for links and for smaller parks, which relate to our promise about making parks available to people within 500 metres. So if the policy is adopted tonight, it will actually stop places like Kingsbury, Reservoir South and
10
Preston
seconds.
West ever filling in with the small minor parks.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to the amendment?
With the urban forest strategy, the tree canopy coverage is 25%. And if we're looking to be more in line with what Melbourne's got, its target is 40%. The open space strategy at present is a little ambitious in some ways, but it's quite ambiguous where it doesn't actually line up with what our nearby neighbours and what they're doing and working on. So I'd have to agree with my fellow councillor that if we are to push the boundary and we are to try to be trailblazers here in Darebin, I think we need to increase our tree canopy.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Would anyone else want to speak to the amendment? Councillor Lasserf, yes.
My question relates to the urban forest strategy. I understand that document was adopted in 2013. Is there an end date to that strategy, or is it being reviewed any time in the future?
Thank you. I'll direct that question to Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the strategy is current, and so our expectation is that it runs alongside of the open space strategy. I would need to check the end date, but it's clearly setting a target out to 2025.
Thank you. Are there further speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCarthy.
I'll speak against the amendment. I first want to just note that this is the first time I've seen this amendment literally on the screen this evening. So I don't know if it's been circulated in advance of this meeting, but this is the first time I've seen it. And looking at it now, I would express some concern that a number of statements have just been made in relation to the important work that's in this document that are incorrect. I'm not going to go through those in detail. What does concern me is that we have proposed amendments here to a strategy that has an enormous amount of work that's gone into it, that's been considered by experts who give an enormous amount of time to looking at this in detail. And we have these sorts of amendments that could be quite substantive, literally as we're walking into the meeting. So that for me is not a good process. It does not result in necessarily good outcomes. And I would ask the question about why so late. In relation to the question about providing this information and the open space strategy in all top 12 community languages, I'm satisfied with the answers that our officers have provided in relation to the fact that the document itself can be translated in that way, and also that achievement can occur in relation to the document as we move it forward into its final phase. I would repeat my concern about the time frame that's been put forward for councillors to actually consider these, but also the disrespect that I think that sits within it to people that have actually been involved in this process, that this has just come to us now. We have another go at this document when it comes back to us, if adopted tonight in its draft form, when it comes back to us in its final form. So I'm not closed-minded to the proposals that are there. I'm certainly not closed-minded to increasing the amount of open canopy coverage in open space, but I'd actually like some professional advice in relation to that before we go making significant changes.
Thank you. That's time. Are there further speakers to Councillor Lawrence? What's the point of order?
Madam Mayor, it's been insinuated that I'm being disrespectful to the report or to officers on this, or that I'm tardy in...
So can you, but the point of order needs to relate to...
Point of order relates to the code of conduct and
which
disrespect for a
which-
councillor.
Could you identify which part of the code of conduct it relates to?
I haven't got it in front of me. If you give it to me, I'll tell you. .7, number E is offensive.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Lawrence. I certainly heard nothing from Councillor McCarthy that I would describe as offensive. So I don't accept the point of order.
Madam Mayor, the statement
Mayor
that this
Rennie.
proposal is late, it is consistent with what I've been advocating on this council for 10 years.
Councillor Lawrence, I'm not going to debate that with you. I've ruled that it is not offensive. So, Councillor Messina.
Mayor Rennie, can I have a couple of clarifications, please? First of all, if I heard correctly, we are we are translating documents only on our Facebook page in 5 different languages. Is that correct? So the language translation of this strategy is only via Facebook. That's my first question, and that's what I heard. And my second question is, do we actually physically have a communication strategy that we actually, and how we proceed informing our diversity in our municipality in terms of different languages?
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Messina. I'll refer those to Ms Livier. Otherwise, I could refer it to Ms Bishop, so no.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I can probably answer the first question. So at this point in time, this is the third consultation that we're doing with the community, and we've certainly worked really hard to reach the called community through the consultation done to date. In regards to this consultation phase, you're correct that the advice I gave before is that we're planning to promote that consultation in a light touch way, including through social media, and that most of those social media engines these days will, if you like working in a different language, they'll translate. So for example, I use English and often find things translated from Spanish or Greek that I then read in English, and that gives us actually really good access to people in their own language.
Thank you. And there was a second part of the question which I'll refer to Ms Bishop.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. In regard to strategies to deal with our diverse community needs, at the moment we are dealing with that piecemeal. What we are doing under the community engagement strategy and framework is actually developing a holistic approach to how we manage this going forward.
Thank you. I've got... Sorry, you wanted to speak to it, Councillor Messina? So you're speaking to the amendment. Thank you.
When we talk about briefings during our process, we have a look at reports that substantiate motions and why we need why we have recommendations. I understand what Councillor Lawrence is advocating for. However, we have no reports that actually backs up any of those notices, any of those amendments. That is the disappointing factor for me. If we're going to put something into the chamber that is quite late, that doesn't support a report, how can I vote for something that comes out of thin air? I need something more concrete than going from 25 to 40% without having a report to back at that particular strength of that particular argument. Now, I want to go back and I want to hash our community engagement when it comes to our cold community. I am not happy with the answer about translating only on social media. I understand that there's been some process that's been undertaken previously, but putting up this strategy on social media for a translation is not coming through, and because 7% of our municipality do not have access to the internet, that do not use Facebook. So moving forward, I'd like to see some action by this council that incorporates all of our languages in our municipality.
Sorry, Councillor Messina. Thank you. Further speakers to the amendment. Councillor Lasserf.
I just wanted to point out, I'm speaking against the amendment, I just wanted to point out, particularly in relation to the third point there, that a 40% tree coverage by 2040 is basically equivalent to a 25% tree coverage by 2028. If you're just doing the crude maths, it's 0.755% per year in terms of the targets. So to say that we're not ambitious enough and that it needs to change to be aligned with the City of Melbourne, well, actually, it's equivalent to. And the language in the urban forest strategy is that we aim for at least 25%. So ideally, we want to go beyond 25%, and that's what the current target is. So, I mean, it's just changing numbers, really, to get to make the same outcome. I'd like to see the urban forest strategy, or the tree coverage target, reviewed at some point when we are thinking about the overall urban forest strategy, because that's when we will have the information to make better decisions, because we will look at assessing the current tree coverage and what's possible in terms of a stretch target at that point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Councillor Amir? Councillor Amir was speaking. Was there... Yeah, I'll go to Councillor Amir. Thank you.
I'm also speaking against the motion. The reason for that
amendment.
Sorry, against the amendment for the motion overall. The reason for that is the recommendations we have before us is not to adopt this tonight, but to release for consultation. So there's been a number of different issues raised here and some different points around them. We are releasing for consultation. Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams have drawn attention to areas that they think are important, and that this can then give that focus for when the community is providing their feedback and considering what's needed. And if there are gaps, I absolutely hope that those can be filled. In regards to the content, absolutely, I agree that we want more trees. I guess we need to be continuing that in a way that is responsive to the changing nature of our community. For example, I'd be really keen to get rid of some car parks and plant lots of trees there, but could be a bit of time before we can convince people of that. In regards to the comment about linkages, I absolutely think that's important, and I think while that might not be met through the driver of access to nature, it absolutely, I think, can and will be met through the goals around protection of threatened species and protection of biodiversity. We can't protect threatened species without providing access links. So that's absolutely consistent with what's in here, the acquisition of linkages and continuing to protect what we have already. Also, I just wanted to, I guess, emphasise that this is a complicated space to be working in, and there are many goals that we're trying to achieve through the strategy. So to pull out 4, one is community access to open space for many purposes.
10
one
seconds.
is biodiversity protection, bushland protection, and climate action. Sometimes these are consistent, sometimes these goals are in tension. All are important, and that's why we need to have nuanced conversations and expert input before making the final decision.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Newton has her hand up.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mayor Rennie.
Newton.
Just briefly, I'm also speaking against the amendment. So this is something that we're actually putting out for a final 3 weeks of consultations. And it's something we've been working on for quite a long time. So really wanted to support Councillor Messina's point that these amendments are coming to us without any evidence base, without any warning. I think we received these at about 15 minutes to 6. So for me, I think it's incredibly important for us to have an evidence base. I think it's incredibly important that we consult with the community, and we're going to have another 3 weeks to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Everyone has spoken to the amendment. Councillor Lawrence?
I have a question.
Yes?
Mayor Rennie, through you, just because of a number of conflicting statements by the ruling group, I'd like to seek
I
officers'
take offence at that comment. I'll ask you to withdraw it.
from the majority group.
Councillor Lawrence, I think it's unhelpful to make offensive comments, and I'll just ask you to ask your question.
I'll seek clarity from the officers. Is the statement by Councillor Messina and Councillor Newton that the 40% target is not supported by the urban forestry strategy or by any substantive thing, or is late, correct? Or is the statement by Councillor Surf that it reflects both the urban forest strategy and the strategies of Melbourne City Council correct? I'm just a bit confused.
I'll ask for some clarification from Ms Olivier about that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I would say that the target is at a broad level. We haven't contemplated a target out to 2040 at this stage, so I can't comment on whether it's consistent or inconsistent with existing. The intent of the open space strategy as drafted is to be consistent with the urban forest strategy.
Thank you.
I'm not clear from that answer what that means.
I have heard that the open space strategy is consistent with the urban forest strategy, or that is the intent, and that the strategy didn't plan to have a target for 2040, it goes to 2028.
That wasn't the question. The question was to the amendment which we're debating, not to the substantive motion which we haven't got to. The question was to the amendment, which was, we've had comments on this side that is based with no policy and no evidence.
So there is no...
We've had a comment that it actually reflects the urban forest strategy here.
I'll ask you to take your seat, I think.
The council. So that was the question. Does that point on point 3, does it, because I want some clarity, some objectivity, because we've had 2 opinions here.
Sorry.
Does it reflect
I'll
the
ask
urban
you to
forest
take your seat. We've
strategy
heard.
or the Melbourne City Council strategy?
Ask the CEO to respond to that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Councillor Lawrence, the truth is we can't answer that question because we haven't done any work out to 2040. So on the basis of what we have in front, I'd have to get back to you to understand whether it's consistent or inconsistent. So I don't know the answer.
Can I say one sentence which might clarify my comments that might be
No,
useful?
I can't accept. I can accept a question, but I can't accept any comments at this stage. Everyone has spoken to the amendment, so I propose that we put the amendment to the vote.
So could I just get an answer? Is it consistent with the Melbourne City Council policy?
We're not able to answer that. I'm not able to answer that question.
So we're releasing a strategy without looking at the leading ones. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
You may ask a question.
And it might have to be taken on notice. Can we please get an assessment based on the current canopy cover in the urban forest strategy to the target in the urban forest strategy, and what the difference is between them, and then what the expected rate of change is in percentage terms for each year, and do the same for the City of Melbourne's targets, and compare those two.
Thank you. I accept that we won't be able to answer that now, but we'll take that on notice. Thank you. So everybody has spoken to this amendment. I'll now put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. So back to the substantive motion. Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Amir have spoken. Are there any further speakers to the motion? Yes, Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the motion.
Certainly.
Yes, I think we need to support this because basically this has been a long time coming, and notwithstanding that this target is slightly less than the urban forest target, because the urban forest target has a stretch goal of past 25%, and this is settled on at 25%. I'm not going to get into amendments on it. But I did want to put forward to people a more ambitious and a greener and bolder option to actually map out a vision similar to the City of Ballarat, similar to the City of Melbourne, which paints a very big picture. So I'm going to support this, but obviously I'm going to flag a notice of motion because councillors haven't read the detail of the biodiversity purchasing clause close enough. It says all purchases must add to biodiversity. So there will be the small park syndrome where those 3 suburbs I've highlighted that have double the shortage of open space won't be addressed here. So they're things that will be addressed by notices of motion later.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to speak in support of this proposal. So this is my 3rd year on council, and before I was on council, I never would have thought about what an open space strategy would involve or what that was for. But I do live in Darebin, and I know that, as the report talks about, we are having an increasing population. We're seeing new developments. We're seeing children grow up in apartments. We're seeing, particularly in Reservoir 1, house knocked down and 5 or 6 townhouses built. So we're seeing absolutely less open space on private property. And what this strategy aims to do is to really redress that and to increase open space in the public land that we have. And I think what I've been really enjoying about the process of learning more about this over the last 3 years is working with our community and working with the experts on it. So, for example, we were out on Saturday morning at the old Ruthven Primary School with the Ruthven Community Reference Group and the Darebin Nature Trust. We were with Luke from the Bush Crew, who's worked at Darebin in this space for over 20 years. And the knowledge that he has combined with the local knowledge from the Ruthven Community Reference Group, plus the expertise of the Darebin Nature Trust, meant that we could wander around that park, we could talk about the native grasslands, we could talk about the history of the area, and we could look at what it'll be like when we basically rewild it. And for someone who's not coming from that background, it's an incredible learning experience to me, and it's incredible to be a part of seeing Darebin be rewilded. And I really commend this strategy for that reason, because the work that we have done has meant that the community's been involved, the experts have been involved, and our officers have been involved. So I'm really excited about what this means for not only the climate emergency, but just what it means to live here in Darebin. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? There being none, Councillor McCarthy, would you like a right of reply?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to all speakers for their engagement in this debate on this issue. And I'm pleased that it looks like it'll go out for its final stage for consultation. I just want to respond to one of the issues that Councillor Lawrence raised, which was to assert that by virtue of having what is a default position for rewilding and for bushland and for biodiversity enhancement, that would mean that sites would not be purchased if they didn't deliver that. And I think we need to understand actually how biodiversity is improved, enhanced and actually delivered in this setting. There are sites in Darebin that currently have what we might describe as low biodiversity value. However, there is also practices underway, and there's work underway through the Darebin Nature Trust and through our officers and through a range of organisations that we are aligned with, which actually looks at how we can rewild those spaces. So if we were to purchase a space that is currently might be considered a brownfield space, not a green space, it's actually the ability to rewild that space through dedicated and enhanced investment. The way we do that is by not only purchasing that space, but actually doing the sort of planning and the sort of work that Councillor Newton just referred to there, such as at Ruthven, where we've actually got spaces that have limited biodiversity value at the moment, but in fact will have enormous biodiversity through that investment. So I appreciate Councillor Lawrence's concern, but I actually think it's potentially what I would describe as a misreading of what the intent of that is, because the funding that is attached to this sort of a strategy is the sort of funding that we need through an increase in the open space levy to see that targeted investment in these spaces that our community loves so much and deserves to have within 500 metres of their home, within walking distance, within rolling distance,
10 seconds.
close to home, so that they can have those immersive experiences with nature that we all deserve to have, and that of course nature itself needs in order to continue to be a biodiverse place such as Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina?
You, Mayor Rennie.
Yes.
Did Councillor Lawrence speak against the motion?
I think he indicated that he is going to vote in favour of the motion.
So a right of reply is given to a councillor if somebody opposes a motion, is that correct? Exactly.
Okay, I'll clarify that. Thank you, Councillor Messina. I will check that. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Messina. The local law is actually not clear on that matter and doesn't prohibit someone having a right of reply, but I do acknowledge your point because it actually has been the custom not to offer a right of reply in this circumstance, so I apologise if that wasn't what we would customarily do, but it's not prohibited by the local law. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to 8.3, Penders Park Draft Master Plan.
Could
yes.
we have that noted as unanimously?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Yes, I will ask that that be recorded as a unanimous decision. 8.3, Penders Park. Councillor McCarthy, and you're moving the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lasserf, thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Once again, we have a piece of work that has been undertaken with an extraordinary amount of community input, in this case the Penders Park Draft Master Plan, and the proposal tonight is to go out for a final stage of consultation with the broader community in line with our policies and processes. I want to start off by picking up point 2 in the recommendation, which is to say a massive thank you to the project control group, community members who live close to and adjacent to the park, who have dedicated, I think I cannot actually calculate the total number of hours, but it is beyond anything that I've ever seen in any community process in this city on a particular project, to the point where the project control group have been meeting pretty much fortnightly for the last couple of years. And to have that level of engagement in a process voluntarily around the local park is actually mind-blowing. So my hat's off to them. They are absolute champions, not only of working collaboratively together, but also of making sure that voices are heard. What was very clear, and it comes through in this report, is that Penders Park is a really important part of the community in Thornbury and also in South Preston, which just sits near its border. It is for many people their backyard, it is their front yard, it is the place where they recreate, it is the place where they get relief, and it is certainly a place which they want to see nurtured and maintained into the future. And the draft plan, the master plan, which councillors have had the benefit of having a presentation on from the project control group, shows the level of care that this community group, in partnership with officers, have done, not only to look at protecting those heritage elements, to engaging with diverse community, the occasional users, the casual users, but also to reaching out to those people who have a stake in our natural spaces, but maybe don't have a direct involvement in the day-to-day. One thing you'll see is that the Penders Park Control Group have, the community group as they like to be referred to, have reached out to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Land Compensation Council and have engaged them around the naming of parts of the park, parts of the gardens there, to actually have a connection to the traditional owners and custodians of the land. There's also an enormous amount of work that's gone into making an intergenerational and accessible play space that is far and away a response to some of the issues that members of the community have been raising for a number of years. The other thing that I just want to highlight here is that because Penders Park is a heritage park, it has a whole lot of heritage controls around it, which are quite unusual for one of our local parks. They have worked within those constraints and managed to come up with something which is
10
exciting,
seconds.
but also respects the past, the present, and of course the future. So I look forward to any final feedback we get, and I want to say once again a huge thank you to the Project Control Group.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserve.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. And I just wanted to echo Councillor McCarthy's comments, particularly in relation to the work of the Project Control Group. They have put in an extraordinary amount of time and effort into this process, as well as Councillor McCarthy as the chair of that group, to make sure that they have built a master plan that is built by the community and for the community. This, as Councillor McCarthy said, this is one of our heritage parks that has been a park for over 100 years now. So there is a legacy already there, and hopefully through this master plan we're setting it up for its next 100 years. One thing I just wanted to read out of the master plan, which was written in April 1927 by the then town clerk. I love this quote. Parks are the lungs of a city. Indeed, they are more than this, as they provide for the recreation, rest and education of the citizens. And I think that that truly reflects the themes or the areas that this master plan has covered, whether it is about the identity of its heritage and extending that further to the Aboriginal, the traditional owners of this area, the need, within the community group for it to be accessible, equitable and universal, the drivers around sustainability, connection to nature and playfulness. I think that those elements within the master plan really go back to that original quote of the town clerk, and I think it really brings it all together. I'm looking forward to this being final, and we're getting on with the work of implementing this master plan. If memory serves me correct, there was money in the budget to get a start on this financial year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this park transform over the coming years.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserve. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to congratulate the councillors on this excellent work. And this park is a local park, but it's actually almost the size of a regional park, and it fills in that role because just above here is actually one of those black holes in Darebin where they have double the shortage of open space there. So that's quite serious because the heat island effect itself is localised across the city, and there's a disproportionate health burden on some parts of the city, notably South Preston, near here. So, you know, this is actually where the rubber hits the road in terms of urban forest strategy, where we're actually greening the city, and it's backed up. It's not words, it's backed up by money and a program. So congratulations to all involved.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Williams.
This is a wonderful news. We've had many residents that wanted to be on the committee, and those who actually been very successful in being on the committee have done a wonderful job in coming together on a regular basis and being a voice for many others. Now, it's had some minor changes just recently or over the years regarding bins and relocation of dog dispenser bags, but this new upgrade of the master plan will actually do a lot more, especially for those who have any types of disabilities. So we'll have a new all abilities play space. They'll be looking at a new changing place facilities. They'll be looking at new pathways for jogging and walking and wheelchairs and pram accessories. They'll be looking at relocating the play space area so it's closer to the toilet block. And they'll also be looking at a safety audit to consider what factors that make the community feel like they feel safe or unsafe. They'll also be looking at a new accessible parking space installed for people having better accessibility for those with disabilities. So I think the park is very old, and yes, it does have some significance, but it's definitely will be coming up to what I would consider as being accessible, especially for today's people that will be using it. And as my fellow, and echo what my fellow councillors have already said, it will definitely outlast all of us here, and it'll definitely go for another 100 years.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I just want to say one statement, and that is that passion drives your purpose. And I think this is what this particular group did. They got together and I was blown away by their presentation, and everything that they were passionate about was echoed into the presentation. And I just want to say what an amazing achievement, what an amazing group. And when you come together and you have a vision and you have a plan for that vision and you follow the rules, it comes through. So I'm just really happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously, and I'll ask that it be documented as such. That brings us to item 8.4 on the agenda, contract award for Below Pavilion construction upgrade.
Happy to move it, Mayor, with the words, and I'll read those out.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. So under point 1, after the word works to insert the name number 2, Construct Proprietary Limited, for the contract sum of $1,348,016, including GST. In point 2, to add the words, to add the number $269,603, including GST, which is approximately 20% of the contract amount, and that has appeared on screen.
That's great, and seconded by Councillor Lassurf. Thank you. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lawrence, was that a question?
Yes, Mayor Rennie, just through you to the CEO. I just wanted to ask a question about this figure that has just been read out now, so it wasn't known to me till right now, of a 20% variation on the contract, and why the reasons that there might need to be a 20% variation.
Thank you. I'll pass that to the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, Councillor Lawrence, the details of the in your green papers, there are further details, but nevertheless, the contingency is calculated based on a risk assessment for each project. So it varies depending on the location. The team will have done due diligence around this project specifically, and there might be an indication of sometimes latent soil conditions that can lead to a higher than, industry standard tends to be 10 to 15% contingency. I've asked the organisation to increase that to cover risk. We've encountered a number of properties recently in large-scale projects where the risks are high, where we've uncovered issues that haven't been immediately available, even with due diligence. And there's also some evidence of contamination across the city that isn't well mapped. So the scale of this project plus the complexity of the project points to that 20% in this instance, but it's a bit of a case by case.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson.
Yeah, just a supplementary question, because the variation for the multi-sport stadium was 20% because of flooding, because there's a flooding around Station Street. There's no flooding in this area though, is there?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Councillor Lawrence, I don't believe so, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Whilst this may just seem like a matter of procurement, and as councillors would know, we try to bring as much of the procurement decision-making into the open chamber, and hence in previous years this wouldn't have happened. This would have been done under confidential business. But in this case, this is not just about procuring a contract for a pavilion upgrade. It's actually about opening up a facility to much greater use by our diverse community. And in particular, as councillors would note from the report, making the Bill Laurie Oval Sports Pavilion disability compliant. And this is really important because if our community cannot access a sporting pavilion, then that sporting pavilion is not fit for purpose. Our sporting pavilions, as we know, regardless of what the sports are, need to be compliant, accessible and inclusive to our diverse community, including people in a range of abilities. Significantly as well, as Council has a strong and consistent response to increasing women and girls' participation in sports, there is clearly a problem at the Bill Laurie Oval Sports Pavilion in terms of female changing facilities, being that there are none. And that's a glaring omission of the past, but we're correcting that today by virtue of supporting this next stage. And as we also know, we are home to the premier Darebin Falcons Women's Sporting Club, who of course do engage at Bill Laurie Oval in both training and also matches. It is an absolute abomination that the Premier Women's Sporting Club does not have female-friendly changing facilities as is described in this report. So whilst this may look like a procurement decision, it's actually about equity, it's actually about transformation, it's long overdue. It is saddening to think that we're in 2019 and this is only happening now, but better late than never, and let it also be a sign to other clubs and other communities that we need to get better at this. That these, when facilities are constructed now, there is no way we would put something in that's not, that does not have female accessible change rooms and disability compliance. So we need to correct the mistakes of the past, and that's what we're doing here this evening with this upgrade. Thank you to the officers and thank you to the clubs that are involved in putting this together as well.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
I don't have much further to add to Councillor McCarthy's comments, but just to say that that we were fortunate enough to receive part funding for these projects through the state government, through SRV, who are providing $500,000 to the cost of this upgrade, to that $1.5 million and $1.3 million, sorry. And so I just wanted to draw attention to that and thank them for that contribution.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to speak in favour of the motion. Obviously, this is actually a construction contract and relating to a premier venue in the city that has an incredible history. Obviously, it's named after one of our most favourite Thornbury sons, Thornbury taking over the world. And we're now opening that up to the whole community and not just part of the community. Now, the other issue about this, of course, which I did raise a question about, and I'd note this is a concern only, is that if we're going to normalise a 20% contract variation, we're probably signalling the whole construction industry to look for difficulties. So it's not something I can deal with here, and especially with a premier venue, there's a whole lot of issues about maintaining continuity, timelines, etc. But, you know, if our variations are going to be going from 10% to 20%, on my calculation, that means we're going to be building 10% less sports pavilions.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.5, G. Robinson Park Pavilion Upgrade. Councillor Messina. I think we have to find out what Councillor Messina's motion is before we can second it. But then I think Councillor Williams also...
Happy to move the motion, and I'd like to insert the following. Under item number 1, through you, Mayor Rennie, beg your pardon. I'd like to insert the words upgrade to stages 1 and 2 works to construct the Connect $1.348 million and $16, including GST, and under item number 2 to insert $269,603.
Can I just check? No, I think you're on the wrong one,
Yes,
Councillor
because-
Messina. Can you just check that you're on 8.5?
Goodness me.
I have
Sorry.
a different amount with
I'm
different,
sorry. Can I correct that? I beg your
Thank you.
pardon.
We'll start again.
Okay, under item number 1, 740,000 award to upgrade to GE Robinson Pavilion, upgrade to Eastern Property Services for the contract sum of $740,132 GST inclusive. Item number 2, to include the amount of $71,500 GST inclusive.
Thank you, Councillor Messina, and that's seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor
Mayor
Lawrence?
Rennie, I had a question.
Yes? You can ask your question now.
Just because of my pea brain, with these figures flying, can we have a response from the CEO about, is that amount, oh, that's the GST. Oh, that's not the contingency amount, that second
contingency
figure? That's
is-
the GST figure?
No, the second amount is the contingency amount of 71,000. So in this case, yep.
It's 10%.
I'll get the CEO to answer this question.
Just because now I've got 4 figures written down, because 4 figures been, and I'm not quite calculating
Sorry,
percentages
the
correctly.
CEO will respond to that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. So on the screen, Councillor Lawrence, are the figures. We had a bit of a bumpy start, but now we've got the figures in front of us. So the contract sum is $740,132 and a 10% contingency, just under 10%, $71,500 in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Messina.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I recall in the first year as a councillor, I was called by the tennis club to go out and visit them, and I was actually quite shocked at how undervalued in terms of maintenance of our asset by prior council was looking at this particular project. When we went out there, I understood that the residents, well, the established facility had actually undergone a transformation after a fire, and everything was blocked into a toilet. It was severely underutilised, it was severely under-maintained, and I recall putting in a budget bid for this particular asset redevelopment and asking that it be used as a multi-use item. That was one of my conditions. If we could have a look at the report that states that this facility is not only for the tennis club, but this is for the community and any other community involvement groups that want to actually participate and hold functions at that particular venue. I'm happy to report that in this particular report we have in front of us, we're looking at increasing our the facility to include female specific toilets, because at the moment there was nothing in there at that particular time. And also, what a difference it's going to make for that part of the municipality, and not only for the tennis users, but also for our community. So I'm happy to endorse this particular project.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you. So GE Robertson Park is actually located in Reservoir, which is the corner of High Street and Garden Street. We do have 2 GE Robinsons, so I just want to clarify exactly where we're looking at. Now, in this particular case, we actually have toilet blocks that are no longer deemed fit for purpose, neither meets the club's or general community standards. Its current building construction and its codes are definitely no longer compliant with the DDA guidelines. So you can imagine you've got this growing tennis club that's actually working out of a pavilion area that's completely not fit for a human at all. So obviously this works is definitely will go to some fantastic use, and it's wonderful that the Eastern Property Services are actually here in in Preston, and so we are getting local people to actually work on this particular site. So there'll be a demolish of the existing separate toilet block. There'll be partial external demolition of the existing pavilion building and full internal restorations. They'll also have an extension to its footprint, to the actual building. There'll be a new bathroom that'll be compliant and change rooms for its facilities. But most of all, there'll be these important issues, which I think are great to hear, which is a meeting club room, a new kitchen, new cabinetry, internal, external storerooms, which are really important to have. There'll also be solar panels on the main roof on the east and west side of the building. There'll also be a rainwater tank harvesting for the system for flushing for the toilets. There'll also be new bicycle parking facilities.
10 seconds.
And there'll be retaining walls and fencing and gates around the area. So I think this jumps like 50 years. So definitely I really feel for the tennis club, and I hopefully it'll keep continuing to grow in numbers.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.6, proposed road discontinuance. Thank you, Councillor Williams, and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
Just moving as per officer's recommendation, which is to give notice proposal to the discontinuance right of way, which is right at for the Preston Girls Secondary College, located at 16 Cooma Street and 229 Gower Street and 1 to 3 Swallow Street in Preston. What we are actually doing is giving discontinuance to this particular stretch, and it'll allow for that we sign over and to be published to the Victorian Government Gazette, and the land that is currently under council, that the road will now be transferred to the Minister of Education and Training for nil consideration. So it's just a normal procedure that council goes through when we do a discontinuance. It's just we have to bring it to council because we have to follow through the proper recommendations, how we go about these discontinuance.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And that was seconded by Councillor Amir. Nothing to add. Any further speakers? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. 8.7, proposed sale of a discontinued lane at the rear of 8 Massey Avenue and 7 Lawley Street. Councillor Lawrence? Moved by Councillor Lawrence and seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence.
Nothing really to add. It's all there in the report and one of the standard closures we've been doing.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Nothing to add.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to 8.8, the 2019-20 Community Grant outcomes. Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Moved by Councillor McCarthy as per the...
As per the substantive motion.
So seconder, Councillor Newton, thank you.
I flag I've got an amendment or a alt motion, I've forgotten which.
Okay, so I'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then we'll hear your amendment, Councillor Lawrence. It may have been sent through as an alternate motion, so maybe we could foreshadow that you have an alternate motion should this motion not be successful.
Circulated to all councillors?
It came at about 5 to 6. Well, it came to me at about 10 to 6. So if you look, hopefully you might have that. Yeah. So look at something. So I think we're going to consider that as an alternate motion. So Councillor McCarthy, and then so we have an alternate motion foreshadowed, and we'll hear from the mover of the motion on the screen. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, a big thank you to all the groups within our community that took the time to apply to the community grants process, which we are considering the recommendations for this evening. Councillors in many moons ago in previous councils were actually directly involved in considering these grants applications processes, and I remember raising it at the time, and I think other councillors also echoed that concern, was how problematic that was in many respects for councillors to be deeply engaged in working through which groups do and don't get funding in these processes. Some time ago, and thankfully, we moved to a model where councillors are not involved at all in that process, not involved in the consideration of community grants, but play a role simply to provide the noting in the chamber of the outcomes of those grant processes, and of course to approve the policy overall that sets this in play, and obviously significantly the amount of funding. And I'll just also echo one point which I think councillors would be appreciative of from the Mayor's comments earlier, which was that we actually increased the amount of money in this current year's budget in community grants, particularly for those grants that cover social diversity and equity and inclusion activities. So we have the recommendation there, councillors, and we also have the summary of the funding that has been committed by category. I'd also just note for councillors' attention that in the process of this community grants process, there's a lot of officer input and assessment and evaluation, and unfortunately not every project that comes through for consideration by officers in this process can get funded. Which means that there are a lot of very worthy and wonderful things that could happen that actually need to find other funding sources. But I would also note that our officers are fantastic, as we heard tonight, at actually supporting those community groups and others to find other ways to get their project off the ground or to encourage them for subsequent years. So I want to once again thank all the community members that have been involved. I'm not going to go through the amount of funding that's gone to different groups. And certainly not going to try to encapsulate the range. But I do want to highlight that there are a couple of new categories which focus on obviously our action in the climate space, a big focus on young people through our work as well, and of course an effort through the community grants process to make sure that we are seeing impact felt across the city, not just by those who are well established or have the ability to put together grant applications, because it is absolutely fundamental that we pick up on those new and emerging groups that are able to connect to
10 seconds.
part of Council's agenda. And I'll end it there, and thanks again to all the community groups, both those that were successful and also unsuccessful in this round.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'm really pleased to see the outcome of the community grants process. I really wish that we could have funded them all. And I think something that we did see here is that it's really clear that demand far exceeds supply, particularly for medium grants and 3-year partnership grants. So it's really good that we know that now and we can look at that for future years. I really want to commend the officers and everyone who worked on getting the word out about this and everyone who applied. I was really pleased to see that, for example, we had 7 applications received from African community groups and organisations, 4 of which were first-time applicants. I think that's really pleasing. And when I looked through the list of people that were awarded grants, people that weren't, I saw a hell of a lot of culturally and linguistically diverse groups in there, which I think is just fantastic. I think some of the organisations that were awarded just really think about the scope of community organisations and not-for-profit organisations that we have here in Darebin and the incredible work that we can support. So just to point out a couple of ones that were successful. Good Sam's Cleaning is a social enterprise to train and employ women who've experienced family violence. We've also got Action on Disability within ethnic communities, sustainable artwork, and we've got other ones for Indigenous community clinics. So I really want to commend everyone who applied, everyone who's awarded, and everyone who wasn't successful for putting in their applications. And we do encourage you to really try again next year. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I've just got a question. In relation to the submission we heard earlier tonight from CareWorks, and in relation to the current appeal against Darebin, what was the amounts for CareWorks and the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council previously, and what was that? You know, what did that money do?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll refer that question to Ms Henderson, noting that Council hasn't funded CareWorks in the past, to my understanding.
Okay.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, members of the gallery don't have access to this, but councillors have access to confidential attachments which set out the details of unsuccessful applicants. And the details for DEC are on page 126 of the green attachment.
I don't have that.
Here, pass.
Yeah. So on page 126 sets out the details for Darebin Ethnic Communities Council on page 126, and on page 125 there's details of Northern Community Care Works.
Thank you.
So I don't have that confidential paper, but I just want to know what that money was normally given for and what it did. Was it admin or what?
So you're asking about past funding?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, okay. We'll just note that the report that
Care
Ms.
Works wasn't, I understand.
Yeah, the report Ms Henderson has referred to was in your pigeonhole, so you, along with all councillors, do have access to this paperwork. But Ms Henderson, are you able to say how much money DEC had in the past, which is, I think, Councillor Lawrence's question?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, DEC in recent years, I think since 2011, had been receiving $25,000 per year, and in addition to the venue hire for free and the office for free.
I don't want to badger, but I'm just asking, what was it for? I'm just trying to get a picture of the history of that. Was it admin or was it events or projects or?
Thank you, Ms Henderson. Are you able to provide details as to what DEC might have used the $25,000 for?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, originally I believe that in 2011 the $25,000 was in relation to contributions to the Backyard Harvest Festival. It hasn't been used in the same way in recent years. DEC has submitted an acquittal for 17-18, is our most recent acquittal, and they will, I imagine, submit an acquittal for 18-19, and then we'll have the details of what they spent it on. There are some goals set out in the funding agreement previously, but we'd have to give you those details after the meeting.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Lawrence.
A supplementary question.
Yes?
Am I correct in thinking Darebin Ethnic Communities Council has lodged an official appeal or complaint for discriminatory or unjust treatment?
I don't believe so, but I'll ask Ms Henderson to respond to that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, we haven't received any appeals against the grants process at this point. Any unsuccessful grant applicant can appeal. DEC has indicated verbally that they intend to lodge an appeal. We're not certain yet what the grounds would be, and they need to lodge that by 10 days, by the 30th of this month.
Thank you, Ms Henderson. So we've heard from the mover and the seconder. Did you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to speak against the motion.
Certainly. Over to you, Councillor Lawrence.
Just in speaking against this motion, I'd like to just flag an alternate motion, which is that to ensure procedural fairness, Darebin Council defer item 8.8 until the appeal process in relation to Darebin Ethnic Communities Council's complaint of unfair, unjust or discriminatory treatment is completed. Now, I'll just talk to that so that people know what I'm talking about. Obviously, you know, there's painful memories in this council when the administrative officer for the Darebin Ethnic
Sorry,
Communities...
just point of order. Do we have a second? Is this a seconder?
No, he's speaking against the motion.
I've just flagged the possible alternate motion, which would defer it to allow the 10 days. So in relation to this, obviously we had a rather controversial decision in a briefing in this council, which involved a number of things, but involved the sacking of the administrative support for the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council here in this chamber, and that eventually led to...
Sorry, that's inaccurate, so I will stop you.
In 1997, I'm talking about.
Okay, apologies.
So that's why I was asking the questions about the administrative support of this, because that actually led to a great deal of distrust and disharmony with the migrant community in the city, and of course led eventually to the sacking of the council. Now, the management of our relationship with the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council has since been bedded down with memorandums of understanding to ensure no kind of harsh or unjust treatment occurs again, because really they are part of a critical gateway for us in terms of stakeholder management across the city. Now, I'm not aware of the full details, obviously, of the appeal, which has been verbally indicated but hasn't been lodged yet. But just my own looking at the number of grants and the generosity of grants that have gone into this year, which is very good, I do note that the process that was undertaken...
Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, you're over time.
The process was unfair because it compared service organisations to an advocacy organisation.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? There being none, I will offer the... Oh, Councillor Lasserve.
Given that the motion is to note the outcomes of the program, will our decision affect the appeal process in any way?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lasserve. I will ask Ms Henderson to respond.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's hard. I can't see how that resolution would affect the outcome of an appeal process.
I'll also ask the CEO to make a comment.
Through you, Mayor, my view is no, it doesn't. The decision is not one for the council. This is a decision, so the outcome of an appeal process will be made by myself with the executive team. This is not a decision for council, so noting it, and if there's a change, then that'll be reported for noting.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Rennie.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
In light of the information given by the officers, I seek to move an amendment to the motion.
Yes, it might be too late because I was about to see the right of reply. I'll just check. Sorry if members of the gallery, this relates to whether a debate had effectively closed because I had said there being no further speakers. So we will confirm the status of that under the local law. Look, I'm going to allow the amendment, although I think it's touch and go because I had said that debate was closed and was about to offer the right of reply. But for the sake of completeness, you may put the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, in light of the question asked by Councillor Lasserve and the information supplied by the officer, I'd like to propose an amendment simply that Council note the verbal advice from Darebin Ethnic Communities Council that they intend to lodge an appeal in the next 10 days.
I don't know that we have received information that they will lodge an appeal in the next 10 days. I don't know that we've had that confirmation. Can I just check on that from Councillor Henderson? Officer Henderson. It's too late in the day.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I believe it was from 10 days from the date of notification. So it was 10 days from last Tuesday, which makes it the 30th of July is the deadline.
So, Councillor Lawrence, could I suggest that it would be better if it was that Council note the verbal advice by DEC that they intend to lodge an appeal of to appeal the decision?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So I'll read that out for the purposes of getting it on the board, that Council note the verbal advice by DEC that they intend to appeal the decision. So, Councillor McCarthy, is that amendment acceptable to you?
It is acceptable. I'd like to see the words. Oh, there we are. Thank you.
So that's in addition to the others. It's not instead.
Okay, that's fine. Yep. In addition to. Yep.
Yep.
So
Councillor
point 4 would that be then?
Councillor Newton, is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay. That's incorporated. So there is no right of reply, and we'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to 8.9 on the agenda, Electoral Representation Review 2019.
Happy to move that, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Newton.
Just
Councillor Lawrence?
Foreshadow amendment for that motion.
Okay, so we'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then we'll come back to Councillor Lawrence for an amendment he has foreshadowed. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. As councillors would have read in this report, this recommendation effectively endorses, proposes to endorse a submission prepared by officers to meet the timelines for the VEC review of the council electoral structures. This is an interesting situation that we find ourselves in, given the parallel process that is underway, recently announced by the local government minister, to effectively bring forward a new local government bill that would have 6 points, one of which would potentially mandate the use of single-member wards in councils like Darebin, rather than trusting the VEC process, which is what we are proposing to put a submission to this evening. As councillors would see, the submission date for this process is the closure date is this Wednesday, and then there are subsequent processes for a preliminary report and then the opportunity for people to respond. Having been involved in the previous process back in 2007, as I think around 30 or 40 Darebin community members and community groups were, we were overjoyed at the time to see a change to the electoral structure here in the city of Darebin that moved from 9 single-member wards to 3 councillor wards, and of course that has delivered the type of representation that is more conducive to a city that is growing rapidly, that has a diverse range of communities and needs a diverse range of representation. And I would just hark back to both that report and also this report and submission that affirms the notion that multi-member wards deliver the opportunity for members in our community to not only be represented by all 9 councillors, as we are required to do under the Local Government Act, but in fact for members of a particular ward, residents in a particular ward and traders, to also have 3 people that they effectively can feel that sense that they're their ward councillor. And that means that if they don't like myself in Rucker Ward, they have Councillor Lassurf and they have Councillor Rennie to also go to. And I think that's actually fantastic customer service. I'll be really frank, because it is sometimes also the case that as councillors, one of us may be away, the other 2 can carry the load and of course make sure that our community is responded to in a timely fashion. I would also note councillors have not had any direct involvement in shaping the submission that you see before you. It has not had any councillors' input. It is a submission put forward by officers based on evidence. I'm not going to comment on the merits of the submission other than to say that I endorse the work of the officers, and I particularly endorse the proposal that council openly advocate for potential use of
10 seconds.
Wurundjeri Woiwurrung names if they so commit to change to the ward names that we currently have. That is the sort of
Thank you,
action that
that's
we'd like
done.
to see. I'll finish it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I think I'd follow Councillor McCarthy by saying it is a little bit odd doing this submission or having officers do this submission at the same time as we have the local government bill potential changes for 2019 potentially coming. So the things that I think are worth pointing out with this proposed submission is that the principle is around, I think it's one person, one vote, and the aim is that you get about the average amount of voters per councillor should be somewhere around 13,029 per councillor, and then you want to have the 3 wards be between 10% either way of that. So what the submission is saying is that Latrobe Ward is actually a little bit low. So with 34,999 voters, we're about 10.46% underneath that average vote of 13,029. So the submission that we've got in front of us says that we might need to move the border of Latrobe down a little bit to take in some more of the population, and also that for Rucker Ward, they might need to move up a little bit. So I do commend this draft submission. I'm sure if anyone's been listening to me in this chamber, I'm very supportive of the multi-member ward structure and quite against the single-member ward structure for Darebin. I did read the 2007 report last week, and it was so interesting to read about communities of interest and about what they wanted for Darebin Council, or what the community wanted in the next 12 years, and now to be living it in 2019, where I think communities of interest are represented, and that we've got the highest number of female councillors that Darebin has ever seen. So commend this report and look forward to reading the final submission.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I just wanted to seek information through you from the CEO about, in the preparation of this officer report, was there any consultation with our community groups, who I believe have also put submissions in at the same time? So we do know if there's an alignment with our community?
I'll ask Ms Bishop. Oh, Melinda Misvick.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. No, there wasn't any consultation with the community. This is the, I guess, council administration submission. Members of the community are also welcome to submit through this public process their view on the representation review.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, did you have a further question or an amendment that you had flagged?
Well, Mayor Rennie, I'm a little bit confused then. This submission is an officer recommendation. What's our role in that?
So as per the
role?
motion on the screen, that council receives and notes the report and endorses the attached submission. So can I ask if there's further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'll speak against the motion and just foreshadow the amended, alternate motion rather, that I have.
Okay. So there's an alternate motion, but you've indicated you'd like to speak against the motion, so please speak now.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Rennie. In relation to this review, it is confusing for the community and for all of us that there's 2 parallel processes going on. This is the standard review that doesn't come around that often. I was surprised every 12 years, because in growing cities, things change quite a lot. But so it's really looking at the balances of existing status, and of course the VEC will make its decisions on that. And we've heard often that, oh, maybe Darebin's grown so much we'll get 11 councillors like Moreland, etc., etc. And this is a process where something like that could also be considered. Do we need 3, 3, 4, that sort of thing in the existing structure? So that's a normal review. Now, I note in here that the officers have gone to the issue of debating the merits of single wards and multi-member wards. And myself have been interested in this debate about how we consult when we're having that debate. So my alternate motion that I've put forward is that we actually make a submission that does not mention single member or multi-member wards in this in terms of a, polemics, or if you like, controversy, but rather as a standard response to the existing situation and not assuming any changes. And the reason is that I'm still in this chamber 3 weeks later and we actually haven't spoken to our community. Now, obviously, I have happened to have door-knocked 1,500 houses in that time on something else, so I had some feedback. But that's not the submissions that have come in from the community.
10 seconds.
So at the moment, I think we're jumping the gun on that. And I will also note the history of gender representation. Single-member wards delivered more female councillors than the three terms of multi-member wards here.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
The VEC is, as we've heard, currently considering a number of questions about the makeup of Darebin Council, and primarily what we see in the recommendation is based on the demographics. So it's quite straightforward. We know that population has increased in Rucker Ward, increased in Kazali Ward, has increased in Latrobe Ward to a lesser extent. So in reading what's been put forward, it's very much data-driven and is not giving consideration, I suppose, to the party politics or what the impacts will be in terms of value for individual councillors. It's about what makes sense, what do the numbers say, and what makes sense for the communities, as was mentioned by Councillor Newton, particular focus on keeping communities of interest together. I see this as one submission from Darebin Council, clearly as driven by the numbers and proposed by council staff. It will be one of many sources of information and data and perspectives that will no doubt be considered by the VEC. Certainly encourage residents to make submissions if they would like to. Other organisations may also be making submissions, but I think it is valuable to have a pretty straight down the line, straightforward, data-driven application that shows what would be best for the community based on that information that we have available.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll offer Councillor McCarthy a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all councillors for your contributions to the debate. I am really pleased that this submission has come to us as councillors without our input, because, as Councillor Amir pointed out, it has not had any other lens other than what the numbers say and what makes sense from an officer administrative point of view. I want to pick up on something that Councillor Lawrence said, which I think is important to address, and it probably underpins why officers have probably have said to continue proposing the multi-member ward model rather than moving back to the single-member wards which we had here before 2008, which is that if you look at the trends across the state, including in metropolitan Melbourne, you see a glaring difference in terms of gender representation, which was the point that Councillor Lawrence raised. And the variation is actually quite significant. Looking at the number of women, the number of female councillors, number of women on councils across the metropolitan area, we see a 44% representation of women in multi-member ward councils, compared with single-member ward councils of around 32 or 33%. So that is a significant variation. Now, this stuff is not an exact science, but if we're going to look at gender representation and which system, multi-member versus single-member wards, has delivered great, much fairer and better gender representation, then we need to look not just at one council in isolation, but in fact at the whole cross-section. And that data is the data that convinces me that we have the structure right in terms of multi-member wards versus single-member wards. I would also say, and just to pick up on another point, I'm pleased that we are not intervening or the motion itself is not proposing for councillors to intervene in this submission in any way, because the reality is that any tweak that you make to both the proposed structure or preferred recommendations affects other things. So happy to support it as it is. Thank you for councillors' contributions, and I think we've considered them in detail.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried.
Mayor Rennie, can I have noted my opposition to that motion?
Certainly, we'll note Councillor Lawrence's opposition and we'll also note Councillor Williams's opposition. That brings us to 8.10, tree protection on private property. Moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by...
Do I have an amendment on that?
Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a timely reminder, of course, of the local law which Council put in place this year and which we are very proud of. But, of course, this report actually responds to a question about Council looking at the feasibility and options and processes of including a tree protection bond and other interventions as part of the planning scheme and planning permit process. There's obviously a range of mechanisms that are available to Council in relation to protecting trees on private land and obviously also on public land, and the report does a good job at looking at what is available. In terms of where we are at the moment, and I think this is the critical thing, we have a tree protection local law in place. It is underway. It is starting to do its work as we would expect in terms of engaging the community around the importance of tree protection and certainly providing a mechanism to manage that process. One of the things that is also worth noting, and it's been discussed already in relation to our open space strategy and of course the urban forest strategy which it supports, is the urgency that we have to not only protect what we currently have, given what has been removed, but also to provide a pathway to massively increase the tree canopy cover in Darebin and planting appropriate species. I want to just to point out as well that in relation to this report, which doesn't propose the introduction of a tree protection bond at this stage, it does, however, look at how this is operating in other places, because it is early days for us, and in terms of the policy consistency, may not necessarily be the best way or the only way. So there is a piece of work that comes out of this that probably sits more naturally under the open space strategy in terms of how we move forward. I also just wanted to highlight in relation to some broader advocacy that sits within this space but comes through the work of Darebin Council in partnership with a range of other councils, is the launch recently of the Living Melbourne strategy, which has effectively heat mapped the entire Melbourne metropolitan area and has identified where we have huge gaps in canopy cover and where there needs to be concerted effort by councils like Darebin, but also by property owners themselves wherever possible. And one of the remarkable things that's come out of this is, in fact, that when you look at the map of metropolitan Melbourne, we don't only have our local planning schemes, which is what this points us to in terms of looking at where we might review our planning scheme and introduce stronger tree protections that way, but also there is the state planning scheme. And the state planning scheme, if amended to provide protection for tree canopy cover, would provide a universal response across the state. So I'm not proposing an additional
10 seconds
of advocacy on this front. That is part of our work going forward and is certainly a piece of work being advocated through that broader council network.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lawrence?
Mayor Rennie, I have a question.
Can I hear from the seconder and then we'll come to your question. So the seconder was Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I just wanted to first point out that if anyone doesn't know, a tree bond is something where a land developer will deposit a certain amount of money with the council during development, and if the trees aren't present and healthy after the development, then the funds are forfeited. So this motion is sort of exploring that, and what it's ended up saying is that that we're going to monitor how the tree protection goes first, which is the local law that we've just brought in recently. Something that I found really interesting in the report is how we are doing actually quite a good job of increasing the canopy cover of trees currently. So we know that the canopy cover, it's, could be a lot better. It's 16.6% on public land and 7.1% on private land. But what I found really impressive is that council has increased the tree canopy on public land from 13.9% in 2012 to 16.6% in 2018. So we are heading in the right direction. And what I'm looking forward to over the next year or two is seeing how the tree protection law goes, and if we do need to consider further down the track something like a tree protection bond and other measures.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence, did you want to speak or have a question?
I just have a question, Mayor Rennie, through you to the officers. I'm just trying to understand the tree bonds, and obviously the notes that these could be challenged in the planning system. So I just want to know what happens when that fails or is challenged. What does challenged mean? Does the tree go? Does the money go? What fails?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll ask Ms Olivier to respond to that.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll ask Stevie Meyer to respond.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Essentially, if it's challenged at VCAT, then that's the condition on the permit. So that's the condition that would require the proponent to enter into a deed for the tree protection bond. So if that's challenged at VCAT, then essentially they won't be able to enter into that deed in the first place.
Thank you. Are there further speakers?
Yes, a supplementary question.
Okay, yes.
In relation to the tree bond, we're talking about developers having the property and putting an application in and the trees being there. What mechanisms have we got to protect the tree before it's transferred, like when it's still in the... Because sometimes what they do is they actually letterbox people and seek an option on a house, and they even apply for a permit. They even, do things before the permit, so they may even make an arrangement to prune the landscape before the permit.
Thank you. I'll pass that over also.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The planning permit process also has a tree protection zone used for significant trees. So essentially that's a fencing around a significant tree that would protect it in works during construction.
I would also add to that the current local law prevents large trees being removed. That's what the protection in the local law primarily helps with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lasserf?
I have a question. The report mentions the planning scheme review a few times throughout it. I'm interested to know what the timelines are for that review.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The planning scheme review is currently under the audit phase, so council officers are developing a audit report which essentially reviews the planning scheme and identifies recommendations for improvement. Once that's complete, we're estimating within the next couple of months, then that will be submitted to the planning minister, and then we will commence the rewriting of the scheme, which will be stage 2, and that will be undertaken through the planning scheme amendment process.
Councillor Lasserf, follow up.
Supplementary. Will the planning scheme review consider changes to zones and overlays and other things that could protect trees?
The audit report will consider, for example, introducing a VPO or ESO to protect trees. However, it will likely recommend that further work or further investigation be undertaken to actually decide whether or not that is the right path for council to go down, because there are significant resource implications in terms of administering the scheme. Also undertaking the work, so it's very costly. You need a vegetation consultant to go out and actually identify these trees and write statements of significance for each tree, basically. And then there's also mapping involved, so it's quite a significant amount of work. And there's some questions around whether potentially that's the best path for council to go down, or whether we can adequately protect trees through our existing processes.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
So this report has come to us on request of us councillors to have a look at further options to protect trees in Darebin following the adoption of the local law, which is quite comprehensive, and it's good to see that that's working well. So some of the options that have been put forward were a local planning policy framework, neighbourhood character policies, vegetation protection, environmental significance or heritage overlays, the tree protection bond that's been mentioned already, and some non-planning scheme options around education and advocacy. I mean, some of the work around advocacy we've been doing already. In regards to some of those other options that are more formal, more costly options, we requested this information so that we'd have it to be able to think about these things. And for me, what we're doing here is noting the contents of the report so that we can then continue to have these discussions, monitor the current situation, see if the current law is meeting our needs, and continue to consider which, if any, of these other statutory options we might want to go forward with, either in the short or long term.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Look, this builds on the previous work that was mentioned by the officers in terms of the protections for existing landscape in the city. And this takes it to the next step, which is that we're in a city of rapid change, especially in Reservoir, where, 4 units seem to be replacing houses quite a lot, and there are established trees. So this is a welcome addition because it seeks to apply the same rules to residents in terms of our objectives of tree protection that would apply to, that then are extended to developers, where the change is actually happening. The gardens and the tree cover is actually being engineered by the application of the state planning scheme, which was adopted here some time ago. So, which doesn't have landscape controls that we had in our previous scheme here in Darebin. So this is good. Obviously, there's going to be a watch and see on these things because human behaviour is a tricky thing. I won't move any kind of amendment to this because it'll get a bit messy, but given the comments about tree canopy and my lack of evidence, I would note the urban forest strategy is misquoted in the report, and but it's obviously too late to fix that.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lasserve?
I'm actually going to vote against this motion because I don't think that we should be sitting here and monitoring these things. I would actually like us to take action now. We're losing trees quite quickly, and yes, we have the new local law in place, but if we were to introduce something within the planning scheme, it would take 2 years for it to be introduced, so we could monitor the effectiveness of the local law during that time. The thing about canopy cover is that once you cut down a mature tree, it takes decades for it to be replaced, and I don't think that we are doing all that we can to make sure that we're protecting those mature trees that contribute so much to not only our open spaces, but to reduce the urban heat island effect. I do take Councillor McCarthy's point about the need for broad change at a state policy level, which would make every council's lives easier, and I would welcome that change. But until we see that happen, I would like to see us pursuing stronger protections within the planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Are there further speakers? There being none, there's a right of reply to Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. I've never had a chance to reply to Councillor Lassurf, so it's a great pleasure to take up some of the points she raised. And I agree with some of the points. We all want to see that sort of action. You struggle to find a greater advocate for trees than myself in this chamber, and yet it is frustrating because the major thing that this report identifies is that things like a tree protection bond require a planning scheme amendment. A planning scheme amendment, as I think Councillor Lawrence alluded to in his comments, or might have been the officers, takes a while. In fact, it's a couple of years, as is quoted here. And most frustratingly, Darebin may do it and may go through that process and may finally get to that stage and the minister doesn't sign it off. And our good neighbours to our east, west, north or south may go run along parallel processes, as one in fact currently is, and may actually have a completely different outcome. What the Resilient Melbourne Living Melbourne strategy says very clearly is that we have a complete absence of the controls that we need in the Victorian Planning and Environment Act, and there is significant advocacy work that is alluded to but is not explicit in this report that says we need those changes in that space. And we need to have that happen. I would welcome an amendment, but it's too late for that at the moment, to this, which says how we step up our advocacy in that space. We are doing a lot of advocacy. I spent last week at 2 events where this was the major focus of conversation amongst officers, experts and councillors. And our community is on board with us in fighting for much stronger controls across the entire state, and particularly across the Melbourne metropolis. But I don't want to wait another 2 years for a planning scheme amendment when we need to fast track this as quickly as possible. And there is an enormous amount of work that we need to do to not only enforce the existing tree protection law, but also to get our community on board to actually take action in their own backyards and front yards and start planting canopy trees as well, which is part of the action we can take straight away.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll put that to the vote. Is there,
Question.
I think we've closed debate, so...
A procedural question.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Just this motion, before we vote on it, is put and is lost. Is there any way of council considering the ideas flagged by Councillor Surf in 3 weeks' time?
I'll ask the CEO to comment on that.
Through you, Mayor, if the motion is lost, then we don't have a resolution on a matter. So there would be nothing to compel a report to come back to council within 3 weeks. Yeah.
Thank you. That being the case, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That vote is tied. I'll use my vote in favour, and that motion is therefore carried. That brings us to item 8.11, New Darebin Community Engagement Strategy.
Madam Mayor, can I have my vote in opposition recorded on that?
You may have your vote in opposition to 8.10 noted. So 8.11, New Darebin Community Engagement Strategy. Councillor Newton. If you could clarify what you're moving.
Yes, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor Newton.
Okay, so sorry, I wasn't planning on moving this one, so I'm just moving to it. So This is about authorising the community engagement phase of the community engagement strategy, including a review of our community advisory committees and community reference groups. So this is something that we have been talking about for certainly the 3 years that I've been on council, about how we best run advisory committees, how we best engage with the community. So we're going to be doing a lot of consultation through August about surveying the community advisory committees and reference groups, finding out what they think. And we're going to be really extensive with this consultation, and I'm really looking forward to how it all turns out.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
So the recommendation we have here is to hit go on the community engagement phase of the community engagement strategy. So you could say we're engaging on engagement, which will be no doubt engaging. Couldn't resist. So I absolutely welcome the review of the advisory committees and the ways that we get feedback and ideas and information from council. It's something that from the community to council. It's something that Councillor Newton and I have been talking about for probably the whole time we've been on council, and it is, I think, sometimes challenging to look at different ways to do things, because we often hear from the same groups and the same residents, and to connect with new people and new groups means doing things in new ways. And when I talk to people who are on the current advisory committees, we see some really great work that's happening and some really powerful impacts in some cases. And then there's other examples where it can be a bit challenging to, I guess, harness people's energy and expertise in the most effective way. So I hope that through this process we can identify and implement ways to best harness the passion, make use of people's experiences, and I suppose acknowledge that different types of expertise exist, from the formal to the personal experience, and people of all ages and different ways of communicating, and probably those different forms of expertise and different communication methods means that we're going to need probably a more diverse structure than we have now. This is just part of the process in the development of our community engagement strategy that goes across the whole way that we connect with the community, and I'm really excited to see the outcomes and encourage everyone in the community advisory committees to get involved and be really upfront about what you hope to see.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, I'd like to speak in opposition, mainly to just foreshadow an alternative motion, which I had sent round. The guts of the alternate motion is that we get a new and more detailed report than this, and just defer it and get a proper report. And the reason is, I'll go through the deficiencies, which to me are grounds enough to vote against the report, is that I find that the recommendation authorises consultation on the committees, and the recommendation has no clear instructions or goals. Then we're relying on background information to inform us that the two key goals are to strengthen representativeness in decision-making, ensuring councils, blah, 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 open, transparent feedback on decisions made to allow public input, I imagine that means and or a comma, there's something missing, scrutiny, and to ensure community understands the rationale employed by the council. Now, I find that quite offensive, the second strategic focus. It's very Orwellian, because it's basically saying we're going to persuade the community of the rationale of what we're doing. Now, that is not the role of community committees. The role is to inform our decisions about the lived experience in the city. It is not actually a competition of who's got the biggest PhD or masters. And we're going down a pathway of technocratic and undemocratic review, because suddenly
10 seconds.
Performance measuring our community committees, rather than asking how do we inform our decisions better by understanding the lived experience of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I live by the motion that communication is the response you get. So if you do not communicate what your wants and needs are with the community are actually not strategically put into a place where they actually understand that their input into what our decisions are vitally important. So we need to deliver that message to the community, not only to the English-speaking community, but also to our multicultural community, which I fear that we do not exercise brilliance in. I think we need to deliver that message quite convincingly so that they're open to understanding that their input is vital to our decisions. I think that is a huge gap that we do not focus enough on. I know we've had one-on-one meetings with our communications department, and I want to welcome the new GM in communications, and I'm there in the chamber this evening, but it is almost morning, I think, in my head. But I think we've excelled in this place, but I don't think we've excelled enough. And I think we've been focusing on that in the last couple of years. And I think, so eloquently put by Councillor Amir, where she said that we do receive enough information from our advisory groups and our committees, but not enough from our community. And that is the vital gap that we should be concentrating on. So moving forward, I hope we do listen to them more in terms of their input and their contribution, not just from the ones that we listen to all the time, because they're the only ones that understand the system. Because I think our communication on how the system works needs to be delivered to our community as a whole, and I think that's where we're sadly lacking.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? There being none, Councillor Newton, you have a right of reply.
No, thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried.
Rennie, can I have my negative vote?
You may. Councillor Lawrence will note that you voted against. Would you like? And thank you. We can do that, Councillor Williams. So if we could note that Councillor Williams voted against 8.10 and 8.11. That brings us to item 9 on the agenda, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There are none. So we're now at item 10, notices of motion 10.1.
I have a question, Mayor Rennie, regarding conflicts.
What's your question?
During a public submission, someone flagged that there was a change.org petition, and I had thought it would be tabled, but it wasn't tabled in the petitions area, but it seemed to be indicating it would be tabled or connected to this notice of motion. So I was just going to seek advice on conflict of interest in regards to that petition, which we don't have access to, because I'm concerned I may have conflicts of interest within the petition, which has generated the notice of motion, but I don't have access to the names of the petition. I have raised this issue again with normal planning, with the objections. That becomes difficult because we don't get that.
Thanks, Councillor Lawrence. I'll pass that to the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Councillor Lawrence, my understanding is that the petition is a change.org petition that's been created by a group of residents in the area. It hasn't been tabled with council, and my understanding of the petition is that it calls on the Minister for Planning to take action rather than calls on council. So it may not be tabled at council actually for our consideration. The request that was made this evening, as I understood it from the resident during question time, was in the event that this notice of motion got up, could we attach a copy of that petition to the submission, which I think we can do certainly. In terms of conflict, I don't think there is any.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Lawrence?
Well, I'm just concerned that someone signing that petition, given 22 years of history in that street, near that street, I'll actually have associates, direct family on that petition.
I'm not sure that you knowing people who signed the petition represents a conflict in any way.
By attaching the petition to the motion it sends me for an interview somewhere, I think.
Thank you.
Time to waste.
To the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, Councillor Lawrence, and in fact all councillors, it's very important that you form your own view about whether or not you have a conflict. If you have a concern or a reason to feel concerned, then I would encourage you to act accordingly and take a conservative approach.
Can I ask a question also? In reference to the preliminary heritage assessment finding, which is the Thornbury Park estate, can we actually identify all those streets, or is it only just the ones showing?
So Councillor Williams, we're not actually in the motion because it hasn't been moved and seconded yet. So for a question such as that,
If there's a conflict, that if it involves that Thornbury Park estate.
well, that is the area covered by this notice of motion. So if anyone
Lives in those streets should declare a conflict?
anyone who feels they have a conflict, it is up to individual councillors to determine if you have a conflict. So if you feel as though you may have a conflict in relation to this location, you may declare a conflict. It's not up to any councillor to suggest that anyone else has a conflict.
No, I used to live in one of those streets.
That's not a conflict. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll move the motion as read.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your interest in this, and also thank you, officers, for providing some background information which councillors have available. I just would note the residents that have joined us here in the chamber that are behind the Change.org petition that was just referred to, which has signatures in around 659 signatures online, I see. So a significant amount of community interest in this particular matter, and obviously an opportunity for council to take up the matter through some advocacy directly to the minister. As councillors may be aware, this particular site faced a development application back in the 2011 period, and that led to council taking a strong position to say no to a proposed development on the site. From memory, it was around 4 stories being proposed, and what came to light was the heritage value of the property listed here, which is 31 to 33 Comus Grove in Thornbury. Some residents, in fact, have long family histories and family memories of what that site was, which of course was the big house on the hill with a dairy attached to it, and of course was the prominent house as part of the Thornbury Park estate. These days it is surrounded by not only other houses, but of course a lot of community ownership of the site, because it is the breathing space in some respects to a street that has quite a lot of other houses dotted along it. It currently faces the risk of demolition, and it does so because the Victorian planning scheme does not necessarily provide automatic protection of buildings, including this one, unless they have particular protection controls. And that is what this notice of motion advocates for. Those protection controls require ministerial support, and in the first instance would require the Minister for Planning to step in, introduce an interim heritage overlay based on the strong evidence that councillors have had provided to them that this site has significance within the precinct of the Thornbury Park estate. So it contributes to the heritage of the area in that way. You see that the streets listed there, councillors, that are referred to that would be also potentially included in such a heritage overlay if it was both an interim and a permanent set of controls. And of course, the best case scenario would be for the owner of the site, which I believe is the Roman Catholic Church and the Maronite Church, to in fact have to actually withdraw the demolition proposal altogether. Now, that is up to them if they wish to do that, and of course council's, the motion before you basically invites council to engage with the minister in particular, but also with the owner to appeal to them for a different way forward for this site. So that is the proposal, and,
10
and of
seconds.
course work would be underway if this is adopted this evening.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
Can I ask a question to our officers?
Yep.
Like, will this heritage overlay that you're actually asking the Minister for Planning to introduce heritage protection on the building or on the land or on the garden or all the above?
It's on the precinct, I think, but I will refer that to the officers for response.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the heritage overlay as an interim measure will be applied to the whole precinct, not only 33 Comus Grove, but the encompassing parts of Comus Grove, Harold, Hutton, Fife, Rennie and Keon. So it essentially will apply to the whole property and beyond.
Oh, okay, so we're not talking about one particular site, we're talking about a whole area, but yet we're asking the minister to intervene and protect this particular site because they're asking to demolish it. But yet in 19, where was it? I read somewhere, in 1998, it went through, substantially was rebuilt and it was assessed as not having any architectural significance.
Yes, so the difference there, through you, Mayor Rennie, is that it's not individually significant, and that's why we cannot apply the heritage overlay to just the one site. However, we've done this preliminary heritage assessment of the broader precinct, which indicates that the site is significant within a precinct because of its size and its garden setting, and it provides a significant vista through the broader precinct of Interwar properties.
Well, I've done some history and I can see the significance, but I'm just trying to clarify, is it this one site that we're looking at this notice of motion, or is it a whole estate precinct? So I just want to clarify that, that's all.
So through you, Mayor Rennie, Councillor Williams, I think you will have some advice in front of you that shows a map of the precinct. But what this notice of motion is doing is seeking to write to the Minister for Planning for protection that would apply to the whole precinct, not just this site.
Okay, thank you, Ms Livier and Ms Myers, for those responses. I'd like to move now to the seconder of the motion, which is... So we've got more questions. Okay.
Sorry. I have a procedural question, which might avoid other councillors breaching confidentiality.
Councillor Amir was the first to indicate she had a question, but can I just check that, Councillor Lawrence, you have a question, Councillor... So I have 3 questions. If we could move through these quite quickly, that would be good. So, Councillor Amir.
Thank you. My question is, so there's 2 things that will be happening in parallel, which is the request of the Minister and the preparation of the planning scheme amendment. If we're unsuccessful in getting interim protection and the site is demolished, would that then lead to the cessation of the process for the planning scheme amendment, or would it be pursued either way?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Amir. I'll refer that to Ms Myers or Ms Livier.
Sorry, can I ask you to ask that question again? Thanks.
My question is...
Amir, I'll just get you to...
Sorry. If the request to the Minister for temporary protection is unsuccessful, will the process for the amendment to the planning scheme continue? I guess I'm thinking from a resourcing perspective.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, if Council moves the motion tonight, then we will carry out the planning scheme amendment as for the permanent controls, regardless of whether or not the Planning Minister applies the interim heritage overlay.
Okay. Thank you, and the CEO has something to add.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, just to add to that, so what the officers would do would be moved to prepare the amendment, but that amendment would need to come to Council for adoption for exhibition. So there's another checkpoint.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, got a number of questions, but I've just got a question on process or procedure. I've got a confidential officer report that was sent through. I've had some conversations, but obviously officers are busy in terms of feedback and things on that. But I'm now got a confidential report, and so how do I ask any questions when this is locked up here? I really need this in the public so that I can ask my questions and also participate in the debate. And already I've noted 2 councillors have mentioned items and issues that are not in the public domain but are in here. And I'm restricted from debating it because I don't want to breach the Local Government Act and add to that. Breach has already occurred.
Councillor Lawrence, thank you.
Advice through CEO, how do we openly debate this when it's locked up like that?
Thank you. If I could refer that to the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So the officer responds to the notice of motion is just provided for information. It is confidential. It's not tabled as part of the agenda, and that is the practice. My advice would be to, I'm not sure what questions you have that are not able to be asked. I'm not sure what you feel restricted by. I'm not aware of anything in the discussion thus far or in the questions that have been asked that relates to anything confidential. So I think if you quote from that advice, then that's obviously not appropriate. But if you've got a general question about the way...
It happened twice.
I don't recall that at all.
Well, I'll just...
Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, I think that's been asked and answered. Councillor Massini, have a question?
I need to ask a few questions that refers to what's in this report. Is that possible? 2 projects. So upon reading this report, it implies that if we vote in favour of this notice of motion, that 2 of the projects will be delayed. Is that correct? I'm referring to the last page.
So I'll ask that question to be answered.
And what delay does that mean?
Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Messina. Ms Olivier.
So in providing advice after seeing the motion, we've certainly costed what it would take to proceed with a planning scheme amendment and looked at how we could accommodate that if that was councillor's decision. This is a case where the project work has been roughly costed about $70,000 and would also require substantial officer time. Heritage matters are often discussed and subject to lots of community feedback during the process, which is time consuming. The truth is we couldn't accommodate that without it having an impact on the other work program. And so we've suggested in our advice the projects that we would consider as being ones that we can either slow down some of the milestones or hold for a future year.
That doesn't answer my question. I'd like to know what time frame are we looking at, please?
In relation to the hold-up on other things?
The delay of the 2 projects that are listed in this report,
okay.
What delay does that mean for these other 2 projects, please?
Okay. Thank you for the clarification on that question. Ms Olivier.
So we haven't mapped out in full detail. They're big multi-year projects. What we would seek to do is look at the steps in the next year and work out how to continue progress on both of those and also which things could wait. We would certainly suggest that the population updates to the housing strategy would be deferred entirely to a new year. We'd continue with the affordable housing component of the housing strategy.
I have a few other questions, if I may, please. My next question relates to this report again. It clearly states here...
I'd ask you not to quote from the report, but to just ask...
Sorry, another councillor has, so I don't know why I should be asked not to.
I don't recall another councillor.
If I may read out, in terms of 1998, it said, and if I can quote, because Councillor Williams did read that out, and that was that it was not assessed as having architectural the building was substantially rebuilt in 1998 and that has been assessed as not having...
Councillor Messina.
Two councillors have read that line.
Councillor Williams may have had that history, but I don't believe she read it from the report, so I'm asking you not to read out the report.
Then I will readdress that, and the redress means that this particular 33, the address that we're referring to, the property...
If you could just go straight to the question.
The question is, does the property warrant an architectural a heritage overlay? Are we only providing a heritage overlay over a whole precinct rather than the building itself, when the building itself, according to the information we've been given, has no significant architectural dominance or prominence?
Okay, thank you. I'll refer
You have some more questions?
Sure. Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Council has tested twice whether the building on its own is special enough basically for heritage protection, and the answer has come back clearly on both occasions, no. The specialists who've advised at that time have said it may be significant as part of the wider precinct, and in fact we've recently tested that question and the answer has come back that it's likely to be significant as part of that wider precinct. What it does mean though is that there aren't grounds for protecting that building on its own. You'd actually have to look at controls for the whole precinct to be able to make the case.
The CEO has something to add, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Messina. I hear you have other questions.
So just in terms of heritage controls, there's many ways in which they can be applied, Councillor. And one is the sum of the parts argument. So it's not uncommon for streetscapes to offer a particular character, but individually the properties in and of themselves are not worthy of it. They wouldn't meet the threshold for individual isolated heritage controls. It's a very high threshold for something in the middle of a precinct surrounded by other development to warrant heritage protection in isolation. So they tend to be buildings that we can all name, really famous buildings, really obvious ones. The more regular occurrence with heritage controls is the kind of collective, the impact a collective has, and that is the circumstance that appears to be the case here. It needs further investigation, but this is the sum of the parts. So not meeting an individual significance test doesn't necessarily diminish its contribution or importance to the precinct, and that would be what this proposal would seek to examine in more detail.
Your further question, Councillor Messina.
My next question is, when was the last report or strategy or proposal having a look at the heritage controls over the whole municipality, please, and what findings were found?
Okay, I'll just check that the council officers heard that question. Sorry, it's important that we get the best advice, and if that takes us a little bit of time, then we'll take the time to get the best advice. So if we could go to council officers on Councillor Messina's question, which was, when was the last time? Do you want to repeat that question?
When was the last time a
So
significant...
just go slowly. Ms Olivier and Ms Myers, if I could just have your attention for this question. So Councillor Messina, if you could state
My
your
question is,
slowly.
when was the last time a heritage overlay report or feasibility study was undertaken by council, and what was the process? Because my understanding was that households were invited to advise whether they wanted to list their homes on the heritage overlay report or heritage significant report.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The most recent heritage work was done through Fairfield Activity Centre structure plan. It applied the heritage overlay to properties within that area. If with regards to this motion, the interim heritage overlay would be temporary. It would be undertaken by the planning minister without notice. However, that's on the provision that it's temporary, it will have an expiry date, and it's on the basis that council is undertaking the permanent controls, which will go through a much more extensive consultation process.
Ms Meyer, I'm not sure you answered Councillor Messina's question, which I think was more broadly about the municipality. So, Councillor Messina, if you could just reframe that.
My question relates to when was the last time the municipality actually undertook a study on heritage buildings and placed them on the register? Because my understanding is that it was a voluntary process prior, and it was some significant time ago. Because what we have in front of us.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
I would have to take that on notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask Ms Wilkinson to shed some light, I think.
Through you, Mayor, my understanding around 2005, but what I would say is it's very rare for a municipal-wide heritage overlay to be prepared. The scale of that kind of work is really rather impossible. It's far more regular for work to be done on a precinct-by-precinct basis. Most recently, Council considered heritage controls, the introduction of heritage controls for the Fairfield Shopping Centre.
Councillors, it is my preference to get on with debate on this matter. So if you have to ask a question in order to feel that you can debate the matter or make a decision, then, obviously I will allow those questions.
I'm sorry. We're debating something that, sorry, Mayor Rennie, with respect, we're debating something in the chamber that is quite significant for a particular household.
Councillor Messina, your microphone isn't on.
And I think
So
we need
I hear that, and I have not said that I won't allow questions. I've just reminded people that it would be helpful at some point to move to debate. So, Councillor Messina, if you have another question, you may pose another question.
So my question then is, back in 2005 is what the CEO has mentioned, was it not a process where householders actually did nominate their homes whether they wished to put them on the heritage listing or not? That's my understanding of the process.
Okay. Thank you. Ms Wilkinson, is that one for you or Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor, I don't know actually, Councillor, but what I would say is it's pretty unusual for that to be the only form of evidence used because actually heritage controls need to be a merit-based, it's not a sort of a volunteering process. It's about protecting for the good of the city. So it could be that in the first instance, Council at the time called for ideas about areas that might be of importance or just to check, but that by itself would not have been enough to warrant or get over the strategic line. If it was at the time, it certainly wouldn't be now in terms of the test that's required by the Minister.
Councillor Lyons.
Mayor Rennie, I just have two questions that might help me formulate an amendment to address the previous question.
Sorry, yes, I do have a second. Yes, Councillor Lyons.
Questions are one through officers, and I won't go in, is there was an amendment, interim amendment, I know Councillor McCarthy will know this, interim heritage control sought for Alphington area, which featured humble wooden buildings of the 1920s in a very large blocks, and the council sought an interim ruling over a whole precinct. And I think it is instructive for us considering this to be informed about that process and the success of that, because that's the most similar process. And I've forgotten actually what happened, but it was a similar one where we sought an interim protection, and I think we got it. And the other question I had was, I've forgotten my amendment, which was in the budget for additional funds for additional heritage overlays, included Thornbury in it, but I've forgotten if I was asking for $100,000 or $150,000 on that. Officers might have the minutes or something.
Thank you. I'll refer that question to Ms Olivier.
My apologies, Councillor. I don't think I fully understood that. Could I ask?
Just two questions was, I had an amendment go through the budget for additional heritage controls for Thornbury, Preston and Reservoir, picking up on this 1920s architecture that we're talking about now. I think the motion was for 100 or 150. It was obviously based on some kind of verbal advice, but I don't have the minutes here to remember what that figure was.
So that's not a question, Councillor Lawrence. What's the question?
The
there?
question is, was it $100,000 or 150 required in the amendment that was put to the budget in April and July?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I don't recall the exact figures. I would have to check. I do know that we're talking the right ballpark. So each precinct that you investigate for heritage requires quite detailed work for each area. So as you expand an area, actually the quantum of work gets increases significantly as well.
And the other question was just whether that action to protect Alphington that was done some time ago, you know, is something that wouldn't help councillors form a view on this action, and if it's available.
So your question, as I recall, was what was the success of the action to protect Alphington?
I'm pretty sure there was an interim control.
Thank you. I'll refer that question also to Ms Myers or Ms Olivier.
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, I'm going to have to ask for that question to be repeated again.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, Councillor, I actually think that predates us, the officers. So, unfortunately, without any kind of confidence, I could, without any confidence, provide comment on that. I've heard of it. That's about the extent of it. I don't know the fine details of the approval.
Councillor Lasserve.
I have two questions, and I'll try and keep them quick, and I think they're straightforward, but maybe not. Would demolishing this particular building affect the rest of the case for heritage overlay for the wider precinct?
So, Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'm going to ask Stevie to answer that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, Ms Meyer, the question was, would demolishing this building, Councillor Lasserve, do you want to repeat it for Ms Meyer?
In the event that we don't get interim heritage controls and the building is demolished, would this building being demolished affect the case for heritage for the rest of the precinct?
One building wouldn't, I guess, substantially impact on the value of the broader precinct, no. It would, however, just require us to update the precinct study to indicate whether or not that building has been demolished.
And I've just got a second question. In terms of the heritage overlay, to what extent does it actually protect, if it was introduced, protect the building from being demolished?
So the heritage overlay requires a planning permit for buildings and works, and during that permission, the proposed development is assessed against a statement of significance identifying what's special about the building. So if the statement of significance identifies particular elements of the building that require retention, say a facade, then the heritage overlay would protect that facade. However, if it does not detail that, then and if it's a contributory building or a non-contributory building, then they could also be demolished.
Can I propose an amendment?
Yes, you may propose an amendment. I'd like to hear from the seconder first. So, Councillor Amir.
Can I ask the amendment first?
You can reserve your right. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I might need help in getting the words to sound nice, but to add to point 4, that in the event the Minister does not apply interim heritage overlay, the preparation of the permanent heritage controls is reassessed.
I'll check with the mover as to whether he accepts that. Here we are.
If I could just get, before I decide to accept it, because I accept the spirit.
By council?
Just if we can just get the wording cleaned up a little bit, given that's verbatim, but there's probably a
In the event that the minister does not
Apply.
the interim heritage control.
Reassessed by council. Okay.
Although, I mean, I'm happy for variations of those words if it would be cleaner.
Okay, so we have those words. Thank you, Councillor Lasserve. Councillor McCarthy, they're acceptable to the seconder. Are they acceptable to you?
They're acceptable to me, but I just think the wording needs to be correct and precise in terms of the meaning. So I'm just waiting, if we can, for officers to provide advice to Councillor Lasserve to ensure that the wording is correct before I agree to those words, if that's...
Okay, so rather than discussing this, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break. We've been at the meeting for 3.5 hours now. I'm going to suggest that we reconvene at 9:35.
Motion?
Pardon?
Do you need a motion for a break?
We don't need them. I think it's important, it's too important that we get these words right, and I don't think we want to be trying to wordsmith them in a meeting. That's how we do things. So on the grounds that it's been 3.5 hours, I'm proposing a 5-minute pause. We'll be back at 9:35. 9:40. Okay. The CEO suggested that 9:40 might be useful. Gives everyone time to get a drink or go.
So, yes, I'm just going to put my amendment again, because my 100 grand...
Rachel and Stephen. Tracy, don't go anywhere. So, I think the minister can take all the necessary steps required to 33 Praise Road. So